They're right here in print. They're the blue cards.
Okay.
I don't know if I can.
Your arms aren't that, nobody's arms are that.
So we can move to the first item, which is roll call.
Commissioner Abishayan. Commissioner
Doing roll
Abishayan.
call.
Johnson.
Here.
Lewis.
Here.
Lord.
Here.
Sharenko.
Here.
Simon-Wiseberg. Here. Prgm.
Present.
Wolf. Wolf.
Here.
And Wright.
Here. Okay. So move on to the next item, which is agenda approval. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Commissioner Wolf?
Yeah, what I would like to do, if possible, is to move the item, let me get to the agenda, have it come after item 9. It'll be a brief item.
Okay, is there a second for that change in the agenda? I'll second that.
Well, what about,
There was a second.
there was a second?
Yes. So that's a motion to change item 12, item number 9, or to move it to 4 items.
No, I just wanted it to come, before, sorry. I just wanted item 9, to come, sorry, I'm tired. To have item 12 come, after item 9, and then everything else to remain the same order. And it's a brief item.
After night.
Are there any other amendments to the agenda?
I think Commissioner Prgm is performing it. I'll give it to you.
Commissioner Ferguson?
I wanted to see if it might be possible to move item 11 before item 10, or just earlier on the agenda.
Are there any objections to that?
I second that.
Good.
I would have to do a friendly amendment of putting it actually right after the minutes, because if the majority, unless, has anyone polled the audience? I mean, if the majority of folks are here for that item.
If it's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would do it if it's okay, to move it immediately after item 8. So after the presentation from.
I would second that.
Point of privilege, can we get staff to read off the new order?
I have it on here, actually. So it would go, everything is the same up till item 8. After 8 will come item 11. After item 11 will be item 9. After item 9 will be item 12. After item 12 will be 13, 14, 15. The rest will be the same.
Can we skip 10? I have 8, 11, 9, 12.
I have 10 after 12.
After 7 will be.
So 8, 11, 9, 12. Thank you.
All right, are there any other suggestions for changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move to a vote. We'll do a roll call vote, I guess. Sure.
Commissioner Abishayan. Johnson.
Yes.
Lord.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Sharenko.
Yes.
Simon-Wiseberg.
Yes.
Prgm.
Yes.
Wolf. Wolf.
Yes.
Wright.
Yes.
So next item on the agenda is public comment. All members of the public are able to speak either during public comment time or right immediately prior to the item that they'd like to speak on specifically. It's open to your choice and open to your options, so I'll give anyone the chance who'd like to speak now during public comment to speak. We allocate about 3 minutes for each individual speaker. We're gonna try to be pretty strict on those time limits, just given the amount of public comment we'll have today. So are there any people who'd like to speak in the general public comment section right now? And give me your names and we'll basically get a list going if you'd like to.
Misha.
What was your name again?
Misha.
Julie.
William Powell.
Okay, so we'll start off with would anyone like to time the public speaker, the speakers for today's meeting?
I got it.
Was,
How many minutes?
3 minutes each? Okay, so we'll start off with Misha.
Stand front and center and speak loudly, right?
It's your public comment, you do it how you wanna do it.
Oh, yeah, I asked everyone to come speak up front.
Yeah.
Okay, well, never mind, do that.
I'll do that. Good evening, Chairperson Johnson, Housing Advisory Commission members. My name is Misha Lorraine. I'm here on behalf of Be Home, Berkeley Housing Opportunities for Municipal Employees. Be Home is a group of Berkeley residents and parents. We came together nearly 2 years ago, concerned about the growing issue of housing and security and its effect on the well-being and retention of our city workers. The first focus for Be Home has been educator housing. Through multiple one-on-one meetings with BUSD stakeholders and 2 working sessions over the past several months, Be Home has been able to illuminate a path to creating affordable housing for BUSD employees. The district itself has identified several possible properties that might be converted to workforce housing. These locations will be further refined in the next few weeks with the presentation of the first draft of the BUSD Master Facilities Plan. Be Home has sought and received pro bono information from local experts in the financial, affordable housing, and developer disciplines. Working with these experts, Be Home developed multi-unit housing models of 100 units or more with the intent that they be built on an identified BUSD parcel, and that housing would serve a variety of populations. Our work shows that with the contribution of BUSD's land, potential private and public funds, and reasonable rents, we can build long-term, sustainable workforce housing to support educators across multiple area median income brackets. Be Home appreciates the attention and support of Berkeley citizens and this council as we work toward educator workforce housing. We are pleased to have an opportunity to present to this body in April, we hope, and look forward to covering possible funding sources, issues around area median income, land resources, priorities, process, and timeline. Be Home is deeply committed and energized to work with the city and to realize workforce housing now. If you want to learn more about us, we have a website, behomeberkeley.org. Thank you.
The next speaker is going to be Julie.
Good evening. My name is Julie Sinai. I'm a Berkeley School Board Director, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to have this little bit of time in public comment. I'm here to speak to the issue of bringing forward workforce housing, teacher and educator housing at BUSD. I think you all received a copy of the letter that the district submitted to the mayor and council. We have property that we want to make available to develop for educator and workforce housing. An entry-level elementary school teacher in Berkeley makes about $43,000 a year, and they top out at about $90,000 a year. We need to have housing for our workforce. Every single school board meeting we have, we hear a litany of teacher testimony about the difficulty of their being able to stay in Berkeley to educate our children because they can't afford to live here. So the district has agreed to step up to the plate, identify property where housing could be constructed, and begin to develop a plan for planning and pre-development. Our challenge is our facilities bonds have you guys know about bonds, you have to have something written in it in order to be able to use it. Housing is not in any of our facility bonds that have passed over the last few years, so we can't use that money for planning and pre-development. And we're cutting $2 million out of our general fund budget, so we can't use that. So Mayor Arreguin referred this item to the HAC to look at how we might be able to partner together using U1 dollars, developer fee dollars, whatever pots of money might be appropriate for us to be able to do the planning to go from 4 sites that have identified as opportunity sites to 1 site where we can actually develop it. And then to work together with the city to look at how we're gonna leverage whatever public financing we can at the city, state, or county level, along with the revenue that we can get from rent in the project. So we have a lot going on, but we'd really like the HAC to consider this in April, because timing is of the essence, so that we can begin to get this plan and pre-development going on with the engineering and things like that. So we look forward to coming back. We hope that the chair can look at scheduling this for April instead of May.
Yeah, so we're make sure that it's on April.
Yes.
May I just say one quick thing? In reality, there's no money now. You're gonna have to be patient, but our Measure O funds are gonna be coming in and we'll be issuing housing bonds.
Right.
So
So right
patience.
now, the ask right now is not actually for bonds for capital development, it's planning funds. Just to clarify, it's planning funds, so that we can be ready to hit the ground running and break
Is it
ground.
possible to submit an outline of how much?
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is I'll connect with your chair and figure out what kind of paperwork we need to put together so that you have the information you
And I
need.
also don't have a copy of the letter, I don't know if anyone.
I don't either.
Okay, I've got some extra copies.
It's in your packet, it's the very last attachment in your packet.
They went ahead and mailed to us?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
I'm sorry.
You have an
But I have it back in case.
little extra meeting.
Yes, thank you so much, it's very good.
Commissioner Trigger and then Commissioner.
Yeah, since this will be my only opportunity without violating Brown Act to say this, I would encourage, if they're willing to, for the members of the biannual housing policy report subcommittee to perhaps consider this proposal in subcommittee. Or we can also take it up. Either way, I hope that it returns next month to the full pack.
Commissioner Lloyd.
Yeah, I have a question for you, and it's sort of how far along is the district in deciding on a business model for the housing that's being constructed?
So, right now, we're doing a lot of research and investigation of other districts that have been developing housing and identifying what the models are. We have not selected a model.
Okay.
And our point right now is to actually identify a site is the first thing, because the model doesn't mean anything if we don't have a site.
Fantastic, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Could I just make one clarification, Mr. Chugga? If you go to the committee, the subcommittee, would that be before the April meeting?
That is my hope.
Okay, because
Either
we wouldn't
way,
want to delay the April
Yeah.
meeting if the subcommittee's not meeting in between. That would be my only, otherwise, we're happy to attend the subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, I will leave that to the members of the subcommittee to determine, but I think there's broad agreement that, we want this back, next month.
Great.
Either way.
Okay.
There's a subcommittee meeting scheduled within the next like week or so, and the agenda hasn't been set for that, so.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Next we have Leonard Powell for public comment.
My name is Leonard Powell. I live at 1911 Harlan Street. I want to preface my remarks by pointing out that my home of 45 years is in receivership right now. And I have some comments, some complaints about the receiver, but some comments about how receiverships should be conducted and overseen. And I want to leave these with you. I must apologize because I'm going to have to leave as soon as I make these comments. But there are members of the Friends of Adeline here who can speak in my behalf, and in fact are probably going to be a lot more intelligible than I am. But I've written some things here that I would like for the commission to take a look at, possibly at a later date. Number one, I think there should be much tighter oversight by the awarding entity, the entity that awards the receivership, and by the courts. Number two, there should be a very specific proposal or plan on a given project, and a ceiling beyond which the receiver may not spend a nickel. Number three, receipts and invoices of every single dime spent should be available, publicly available to anyone who wants to look at these receipts, see what was spent and why. Number four, I would like to see in my case, periodic on-site inspections by independent overseers to explain every step of the process to the client in my case, to me, exactly what was being done and why. Number 5, an advocate that knows the law and serves at the discretion of the client, so that he can speak to review every scrap, every document that is issued pertaining to the receivership, and so that he is capable of explaining all of these documentations to the client in a language that the client understands. And finally, this is a special grievance of mine. I'd like to see a telephone log of every call made that pertains to the receivership, because I understand my receiver calls, for example, Prince of Adeline and charges $100 for the call. These are just some of the concerns that I have about my receivership. Some of you may have seen television reports this afternoon, because 3 television stations have been at my home just today. That's my complaint. That's what I'd like to see done, and I'd like to present at your next meeting copies of my concerns. And again, Friends of Adeline are here. They know of my situation in great detail, and they'll be able to follow up on any other concerns that you may have that pertain to receiverships in my case. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Is there any other public comment for the open public comment section? And what page you need it?
I haven't been in touch for number 11, but I have another issue I want to bring up. Steve, yeah. And I don't know if this is going to be relevant, but I would like to point out that there was this ordinance passed by City Council about RVs last week. And I'm bringing it up here because the RV, or the van, or the car, or whatever it is the person is sleeping in, functions as their housing. And I think needs to be categorized as their housing. It's partial housing. But as partial, I would like to put forth the idea that it comes under the umbrella of the Boise decision, which says that according to the 8th Amendment, people who are in the kind of a situation where they don't have complete housing have to be given the ability to stay, to sleep on public land if the city cannot provide residence or shelter for them. Now, the city has said, of course, that they are in favor of finding housing for all the homeless in the town. Here are a group of people who are homeless who have on their own established a certain modicum of shelter or housing, meager as it may be, partial as it is. But because of that, the city has chosen to harass or to disparage or to some sense outlaw what they have done and the situation of their vehicle in which they find this partial housing. So I would like this body to, maybe not today, but like the ordinance is going to come up for a second reading on March 26th, take a stand and say that this ordinance that is harassing and criminalizing these RVs is a violation of the 8th Amendment under the argument of the Boise decision, which would then throw that ordinance out on the merit of that decision. That's what I would request, and I just wanted to bring up the fact that this attack on these RV homeless people is going on. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers for public comment? To clarify for those who weren't here earlier, we have an initial public comment session where you can speak towards anything you want, and if you want to speak on a specific item, you can speak later during the meeting, right before that immediate item. So with that, are there any more public commenters? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move over to approval of the February 7th regular meeting minutes. Are there any suggested changes or amendments to the minutes as written?
I only had one question. You know, we had our elections, there was usually one round of votes, and then I guess a motion to adopt the results. So all we have in the minutes are the actual results?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just wanting that clarified.
Sure, no, excuse me.
There's been a motion to approve the minutes. Seconded by Commissioner Lord. Commissioner Trego.
Thank you.
All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes, or do we need what ones do we need a recorded specific roll call vote versus just a?
I want to abstain because I wasn't here.
Okay, well then we definitely roll call.
Commissioner Abdushayan? Johnson?
Yes.
Lewis?
Abstain.
Lord?
Yes.
Sharenko?
Yes.
Simon-Wiseberg?
Yes.
Tregu?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
Wright?
Yes.
Passes.
Okay, sorry. Always forget every time we're the last person. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item number 5. I don't believe there was any public comment for item number 5. If there is any, now's the time to mention it. Seeing none, I'll turn it over to city staff.
So today we have Alex Rochal and Jenny McNulty from the Planning and Building Department. They're here to talk to you, so I wanted to clarify for all commissioners. At a previous meeting, you all asked, Jenny agreed to come back and present to you about the resilient building program's role in code enforcement generally. She's still going to do that, but it's going to be at a later date. Today is specifically about the fee increases they've been working together to develop for the program. So it's going to be specifically about that, but please know that they're going to come back at a later date to honor your request. And with that, I want to turn it over.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Alex Rochal, and I'm the city building official and the manager of the Building and Safety Division. And here with me today is Jenny McNulty, our Resilient Buildings Program Manager, who directs the activities of the Housing Inspection Section. So in December 2015, the Building and Safety Division received a referral from the City Council with a number of proposals to revise and expand the rental housing safety program, including increasing fees to fund a new mandatory cyclical housing inspection program. Just prior to this referral, back in 2014, the Housing Code Enforcement Section, which includes the rental housing safety program, moved from the Health, Housing and Community Services Department to the Building and Safety Division, and the Housing Inspector Supervisor began reporting directly to me. Following this move, we performed a complete assessment of the housing inspection program and practices and identified a number of programmatic and administrative issues which significantly impede the performance of this section. So the referral was very timely, and we provided a timely response, which at the time was presented to the 4x4 committee. This response was provided in May of 2016. And at that time, we provided a 3-step approach. So our first step in addressing this referral was to recommend the creation of a new manager classification in the Building and Safety Division, responsible for the housing inspection and community services sections, and charged with the responsibility to create a new, or rather to expand, housing inspection program. So we had a number of follow-up communications with the 4x4 committee, multiple communications with our HR, and finally this position was established back in 2018. And in December of 2018, we hired Jenny McNulty to be our Resilient Buildings Program Manager. So I'm happy to report that that effort has been completed. The second step in addressing the referral, and that is why we're here today, was to propose the necessary changes to the fee structure to fund the establishment of the mandatory cyclical housing inspection program. Jenny is going to give you an overview of our proposed fee increases and an explanation of how this will enable the expansion of proactive inspections. As to the third step, we plan to return to several commissions, maybe multiple times, in the fall of this year to address all other suggestions and recommendations raised in the council referral and present the complete expanded housing inspection program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny to go over our HSP fee increases.
I'm going to stand for my part. I did want to recognize one other team member who's joining us tonight. Giselle Aikenhead in the back is an intern who's been working in building and safety, and she's been serving as a research assistant. So there's a lot of information in this report about what other jurisdictions charge for their fees that we've been using to inform our decision making. And I want to just acknowledge Giselle for compiling that research. So as Alex mentioned, we are beginning an expansion of the rental housing safety program, and our goal is to do proactive inspections on all rental units in Berkeley on a 5-year cyclical basis. To fund the expansion, we are proposing fee increases in both 2019 and 2020. And I'm here to ask for your input to request that you approve those, recommend approval of those increases to the City Council. I would like to give you a very high-level overview of the report and then ask for your questions and your feedback. So the Rental Housing Safety Program has 3 services. We do reactive inspections, that's also known as housing code enforcement, where we respond to tenant complaints and do housing inspections. We do proactive inspections, where we select randomly a certain number of units and go out and do inspections. And lastly, we operate the Exterior Elevated Elements Inspection Program. And we have 3 types of fees. We have our annual flat fees, we have our re-inspection fees, and we have penalty fees. And we're proposing that we increase each of these fees. So on the very first page, there's a table 1, which is the current and proposed fees for the program. For our annual per unit fees, we're proposing that those increase from $26 per unit to $40 per unit this year and to $52 per unit next year. Our re-inspection fees, which are currently $300 and increasing to $400, we are proposing a structure where the fees will be $400, $600, and $800, increasing as when cases last longer and violations are still outstanding. And we're looking to do that to increase the chances of compliance, to encourage people to correct the violations promptly so that tenants aren't living in substandard conditions, and to really incentivize them with our fee structure so that they don't ignore it. And then with the penalty fees, our finance department charges penalty fees of 10% if you're 1 to 30 days late, and 40% if you're more than 31 days late for their business licenses. So we want to be consistent. We've been charging 10 and going to 20%. We're suggesting we go to 40%. And then the final fee increase is the administrative lien fee that we would like to increase from $125 per lien to $250. So on table 2 on the second page, you can see how the increases we're proposing compare to changes in median rent over the same time period for rent-controlled units, as well as for the cost of living. Our fees, they haven't been raised since between 2003 and 2009, depending on the fee category. So it's been quite a long period of time with no fee increases, coinciding with a time when rents have risen dramatically in Berkeley. The fee increases will cover 7 new positions, 5 housing inspectors, and 2 administrative support staff. And in the appendix, we have our org chart for today and what we're at the end of fiscal year 20 based on this expansion. They'll also fund the increases in program costs due to the changes in the cost of living, and some of the additional responsibilities the group has taken on since council passed ordinances establishing the exterior elevated elements program, which didn't have a funding source associated with it. And also we have taken over the responsibility of revenue collection that was previously handled in the finance department. It will also cover the new resilient buildings program manager position, which I hold, which is 50% allocated to the rental housing safety program. So we're aiming to increase the budget for the program from 1.1 million to 2.4 million, and we are seeking to continue this trend of being self-sufficient rather than needing a general fund subsidy to be able to operate. There are approximately 29,000 rental units in Berkeley, and when we inspect, we also inspect the common areas. So with the units and the common areas of those buildings, we would be looking at doing 32,580 inspections over a 5-year period. That would mean about 6,500 cases per year. And then our proactive inspections typically have about 1.5 re-inspections per case. So a total from the first, with the first investigation and re-inspections is 2.5 inspections total. So we're looking at doing over 16,000 inspections per year. So it's a very significant expansion, and we are intending to do this through a combination of productivity improvements and new staffing. This year we are evaluating all aspects of our program. We are studying other jurisdictions and really seeking how we can improve administratively and in our inspections. So with that, I would like to invite your questions and request your comments. I actually had one other thing to mention. A couple of you are hearing this for the second time this week. Commissioners Simon-Wiseberg and Prgm were at the 4x4 committee meeting on Monday, and there's one question I wasn't able to answer posed by Commissioner Prgm. I promised I would answer that today. So the question was about what happens if there's a single family home, it's rented, and then it becomes owner occupied. How would you find out if that house becomes rented again? So what happens when we bill, if there's a duplex or any property with 2 or more units, even if they say it's all owner occupied, we bill them continuously every year, and they have to tell us every year of their status. But with a single family home, there's so many that if the way that we would inactivate that account is we would check, is the mailing address of the property based on their tax assessment the same as the address of that home, and are they requesting an exemption? So if all 3 of those are the case, we then inactivate that account and we stop billing them based on it becoming owner occupied. The same for single family home or for a condo. So we wouldn't find out unless there's a request for service, or if owners voluntarily report to us that we are now a property owner and that is renting. We're now landlords. So that would be how we would discover that someone had gone back into the rental business, or they had sold and a new owner had made a decision to rent. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions? Excuse me, Xavier, I have a point of order for the general meeting, so I'm sorry. Earlier I was distracted introducing them because I was trying to look. Matthew, so at around 4:30, Commissioner Sargent contacted me because she wasn't going to be able to make it today, and she received an excused absence before 5. And Matthew was appointed after 5 by his council person, but that wasn't confirmed by the city clerk, which is necessary. Unfortunately, I'm very sorry, Matthew, but you're not technically able to serve right now as a commissioner.
No one's been swearing in, is it?
No, it's not an issue of being sworn in. It's a
Specifically asked if I had to do anything.
protocol.
No, that was.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was consulting in the commissioner's manual here, and that's not possible.
Certain about that.
Yeah, I am. I'm sorry, and I was double checking because you were a commissioner before, so you technically have all the paperwork, but.
And that doesn't change by the fact that I'm an alternate commissioner?
Let me double check that real quick. I'm sorry, I didn't have anything indicating you're an alternate commissioner.
Yeah, I'm an alternate commissioner for that council member that has been crucial for tonight.
I'm sorry, I guess if you all want to continue your questions, if that's okay, I can look that up real quick.
For the discussion.
To clarify, what am I, if I was gonna raise to ask questions, if I am a commissioner?
I would wait, if that's okay.
Okay.
Do you have confirmation that you're an alternate
Yeah,
commissioner?
Yes, I can pull that up.
Okay, that'd be very helpful, thank you.
So I have Commissioner Wiseberg and Commissioner Wolf.
I just have a question.
Simon Wiseberg. Sorry.
I just had a question about the incorporation that that your department is now having to deal with the billing. Did you have any thoughts on that? It just seems a little unusual to have each unit doing its own billing. Are you having an inspector do that, or now you have an analyst inside?
Yeah, it's an assistant management analyst and an accounting office specialist supports her during the billing period.
And is that something that,
This is
it just
alternate
seems to
commissioner.
me not a good use
That includes
of
HAC.
department resources, getting some
95%
agreement.
certain.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean,
100%.
I say that for my own, I'm a director, and we had invoicing in my unit, and I kept thinking, why are legal service attorneys supervising invoicing? And so I pushed it back out to our finance department, and it does seem like it's generally more cost effective. I mean, I guess I can make comments, or am I supposed to be forming? That's a question, I'll just say it like a Californian.
Yeah, there was a lengthy negotiation when finance determined they did not wish to support us any longer in those functions, but we didn't have a choice in the matter, so we are handling that.
Is there,
Historically, they've been handling it. So that change has been made, I think we made the change about 2 years ago.
and so that was, like, I guess I'm confused, can I comment, or am I only
Actually,
supposed to be asking questions?
If you can comment and ask questions, you can't make a motion.
Okay, I guess just my comment would be that in increasing the fee, it would make sense for the city government to do the city government part, and then within the unit to be doing more inspection, and that seems, that would be a better use. Whatever, however that helps in any way.
So I have a question and a comment. My question is, I'm showing naivete or that I don't read through every word. Can any of these increased fees be passed on to the tenants? Not even in a non-rent controlled apartment?
Well, non-rent control because they can raise the rent up.
I am not entirely sure when the rent board calculates the allowable rental increase, everything that goes into that formula. So, our $52 fee, that's coming, they do look at changes in costs. So I don't know everything that goes into their formula when they determine this year it's gonna be 1.8% that they then send out.
So that's something that we could ask the rent board to consider. As
Well,
a cap,
I don't
or
know if
just
those
informal?
involved with the rent board might know
There are
in
few
more
people
detail how
involved.
that formula is calculated.
Well, and Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg, if I'm talking out of school, please correct me. But if you're talking about just the allowable rent ceiling, that's
Yes.
a hardwired formula right now. It's 65% of the increase in CPI for
Okay.
each year. And that was reached via agreement with the Berkeley Property Owners Association and memorialized, I think, in 2007. Seven or four, sometime around there,
Yeah.
by a vote of the people.
So,
I have- Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little concerned for some property owners because this is an increase, and I just was wondering about that. The second thing is on, well, it's page 10 in our packet, but it has to do with, the inspector coming back after a complaint has been received and when you come back and do a re-inspection within 30 days. Well, I'll tell you, it's hard to get contractors to come out and fix things these days. So you might wanna consider, finding out if the owner has acted in fair faith, but has not heard back from someone who could come and do the repairs. I think 30 days is a tight window, and you might want to explore that with other people who are dealing with contractors. I'm just concerned about that.
Thank you for that feedback. There are a number of ways that owners may qualify for an extension of time. For example, if they have an agreement with a contractor, but the contractor can't start for 6 months because of their schedule, they can present something to us. But if they come back and say, I haven't got a hold of anybody.
Right, that's a possibility.
Yeah, it is.
Log it into your head and maybe talk to some people who know more about it than I do. But I just think with all the damage we've had from natural disasters and fires, it's really hard now getting local contractors, and all this just also all the inflation in housing prices means people are fixing up their houses to get top dollar to sell it. I think it's very hard now getting someone to come to your house within 30 days. So just look into it. This is not even a house. This could be several units that would have the same code violation.
Commissioner Lord, next in the queue.
Yeah, I'm interested in the question on the proactive inspections, how they interact with the tenant's right to privacy. Landlords, of course, have a right with sufficient notice to enter the property that they own. The city is not an agent of the landlord, enjoys no such right. Does the procedure that you follow require affirmative permission and scheduling cooperation with the tenant?
A tenant may deny access, and if the tenant denies access, then we would not carry out the inspection.
Are there situations where an inspector would sort of go around with the landlord who would use their right of entry to bring in,
No, absolutely not.
That was my concern.
So I had myself next in queue, then Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg and Commissioner Prgm. I'm curious how this process fits into the longer time frame. My assumption, and I want to know if this is correct, is that eventually, if someone's found to have not passed these inspections and it continues to go on and on, this is how it eventually leads to the situation of receivership. I don't know if that's correct. I wanted to see if it was, and then I wanted to get a sense of what sort of resources are available to help, if the city has any resources available to help alleviate some of the issues of property space, and then also how they work with the tenants to make sure that they get habitable properties as well too. But the first question is that base assumption, like, is this the initial stages of how it really can be to the receivership situation?
We follow the process of charging re-inspection fees. I want to just ask Alex, do you know of cases that have started as a reactive housing inspection that have led to receivership?
Well, maybe in the last 10 years, maybe 3 that I know of. So definitely very seldom. I mean, it has to be an extraordinary situation. And it has to result in a condition which substantially endangers the health and safety of the residents, such that there is no longer time for formalities and the action must be taken. And in which case the city attorney then will go to court and ask for the property to be, for the receiver to be appointed.
And so
for
that
the receiver to
discretion
be
lies with the city attorney's office then?
mostly to appoint the receiver, yes, it's with the city attorney. But again, it's not just, when we go out and do proactive housing inspections, we look for substandard conditions. Substandard conditions do not lead to receivership. What leads to receivership is situations where the health and safety of the occupants is jeopardized to such extent that the action must be taken quickly. And usually it's a multi-year process, and the 2 cases I'm thinking of between the notice and order, the notice of violation, notice and order, and the actual receivership, but many years have passed of inaction before the receiver was appointed.
So you you had a second part to your question, which was, are there any city resources to help a property owner with trying to do the repairs, if I understood correctly? So there's a senior disabled home loan program, which is operated within HHCS. My understanding is that seniors over the age of 62 or disabled people can borrow up to $100,000. It's a 0% interest loan. There's a lien placed on the property, and it can be transferred to a spouse or child in the event of death if they are also eligible and qualify for that program. And this would give them some time to pursue other financing solutions. So that is one that I'm aware of.
Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg?
I just wanted to kind of counterbalance in some ways that it's really important actually that you act quickly, and that because I know that you have so much discretion to take into consideration the specific facts, so if the owner can show that they're trying, that you work with them. But from the tenant's perspective, it's so important that you not give too much time. And one of the things that I've seen is where the repairs just never get done, and it's almost like too much leniency given. And I'm not speaking to Berkeley specifically, just more across the state. Having 2 years ago, I think you helped me with this actually. When Xavier was interning at a different organization, we were looking at all the code enforcement practices across the state and the different time periods it took for people to get action. And so they're really giving more than 30 is also in violation. I mean, state law requires you to do it within 30 days. And it actually becomes, lots of different things get triggered at 35 days if the landlord hasn't taken those things into consideration. But because there's the discretion, I think addresses that piece. So I wouldn't want it to go beyond 30 days since you already have the discretion. Because if you gave 60 days plus discretion, then the tenants are living in that chaos during that period.
Commissioner Trey, is the next person having to speak?
Thank you. Yeah, so I thank you, Jenny, for presenting this a second time now. And I will try to keep my comments briefer than the first time I provided them. But just to reiterate, I fully support this effort, and just remind everyone what prompted the rental housing safety program to begin with. It was to address a tragic fire that happened on Greek Row, which led to the death of I think more than one student, and so it was a way of saying never again on the city's watch. And sadly, I have now been through several different iterations over the last decade of trying to advocate for a workable rental housing safety program, more proactive enforcement of it, more consistency across the unit. And thank you so much for your effort in finally putting this together after many years. And just like any department, in order to be effective, it does have to be properly funded. And just for context, Table 1 that shows the median rent increases over the last few years, what is being proposed is half of the increase of the median increase in the rents. And that's just for rent-controlled units. So it would be reasonable to assume that if the unit was not rent-controlled, the rent has increased even more. I think this is a reasonable increase. I just wanted to reiterate again, putting on my regulatory oversight hat, what I do in my day job. I have come to learn that 90% of the cases can be resolved quite quickly if there is a common understanding of expectations. So the example I would bring up is just something for your department to work out. say if there's a proactive inspection and the day before the heating unit breaks down, I would hope that if the property owner has had a history of doing the right thing and fixing it right away as soon as they're notified by the tenant or do an inspection themselves, and that they would not be imposed a fee just because it happened to be their unlucky day. On the other hand, in 10% of the cases, we all know situations where we have had problem, I would say, property owners that have any attempt to re-inspect has not led to compliance. And those were the cases where there is an opportunity to try to, with the increased fees, actually incentivize them to this time do the right thing and get the unit into compliance. And then the final thing I would say is the Form A that tenants are supposed to get a copy of every year. I have found, at least in my tenant experience, having lived in several different units, I think I've gotten a Form A copy maybe once. And this has included situations where I have had pretty decent property management companies that do fill out the Form A self-certification every year. The tenants just don't get a copy of it. So I think it's important to, when you are outreaching to property owners and making it clear what the new expectations will be, that you also reach out to the tenant community and let them know of their rights associated with this. With that, I'm happy to support when there's an opportunity to support the motion to recommend this schedule to council.
I think the last thing that I kind of wanted to add is I think like this program is really, really important for maintaining the habitability of properties in the city of Berkeley. I think just the knowledge that it's going to be able to cover everything is really going to create a lot more positive incentives for property owners to actually maintain their properties as they should. I do think that, I don't know if there's been discussion within this context, but I think it should come down the road of, and Leah's gonna just roll her eyes when I say this, I think, but I think that, like, for example, like low-income property owners, people who like maybe bought the property a long time ago and are living on like Social Security or retirement, who a lot of additional costs are gonna be difficult, creating some sort of city resources to help preserve those homes in these situations so that they can have, like if there's a major repair that like, at the inspection, like maybe there's a foundation repair that people don't know about, they didn't see before, but that does need to be addressed for the safety of the tenants, that there's some city resources to preserve the ownership and the tenants' quality of life as well.
One quickie, if you do something like that, then I would say that the city contribution should be placed as a lien against the house when it's sold in the future. I mean, we don't have that much money, and that is one way that the city at some point could get the money back.
Are there any other?
I think that one of the things that should happen, and I think this ties into what we're talking about in item 11, is that there should be information, you know, like for example, that there are legal services for homeowners, and I think duplex up to fourplexes qualify under that. And if you can get an FHA loan, then you qualify for those services that, you know, HERA does, for example, that I'm administering a program that they're getting funding for homeowners. And so I think it'd be good if you are coming upon homeowners, and I'm saying homeowners, but I mean like duplex, triplexes, particularly if they're living on the property, they can be given those resources, you know, so that they can help them look at, you know, what the different options are in terms of how to finance it. I mean, I think all in the back of our minds obviously is Mr. Powell's situation, and I think that if when that first happened with the receiver, if, you know, I don't know the facts and if someone can tell me more, but, you know, just makes me want hope that if he had gone to HERA at that point, when the receiver had been appointed, that it would be a different situation. But just that there are legal services for low-income owners. And also that somebody should be looking at why they're not getting enough income back. that also was.
And then I forgot to mention one thing that actually transpired, Jenny, after you left 4x4, when we talked about the elevator ordinance. And we asked staff who is administering that program, if the elevator has been malfunctioning for months, sometimes years, or in one case even more than a decade. And there currently isn't a city department apparently in charge of enforcement for that, or that's the answer we understood. And so my point is, this is really positive because you are ramping up proactive inspections, not just complaint-based ones. But we have a lot of ordinances on the books that sound great on paper, but they are complaint-based, and we have several references to them in our packet even tonight, like the smoke-free housing ordinance, the elevator ordinance. The notion of fixing all of them so that they can be done proactively is a much longer conversation. But what I would suggest is for your unit to see if there is any interfacing that could be done with other applicable city staff, so that at least when an inspector goes out, they can pull a record of the prior history of the unit and see what else might be in the file, whether it's complaints for violations of the elevator ordinance, smoke-free housing ordinance, whatever else exists, so that you don't have a bunch of staff members going out at irregular times and doing inspections. You can coordinate it once, and I think that would make your job more effective when you try to resolve all the issues at once.
Is there any more discussion or questions? I think this is just an information item for the most part, but if you need an actual action for today, you're asking for an action.
Jenny, are you asking them to approve the fees tonight, or?
Well, you don't need to approve the fees. I'm asking that you recommend that council approve the fees, because it's up to council to approve
Right.
them. So if you want to make a motion to approve the fees, I will include that in my report to council.
Okay, so there's been a motion to approve the fee recommendation and a second by Commissioner Lord.
No, it's triggered.
Very good.
Thank you.
So now we're in the actual discussion phase. So any discussion? So seeing no actual discussion, then we'll go ahead to a vote. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Abdushayan? Yes. Johnson?
Yes.
Lord?
Yes.
Sharenko?
Yes.
Simon-Wiseberg?
Yes.
Tragub?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
And Wright?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
So
And
with
then-
that, we'll move on to agenda item number 6. Again, I don't believe there was any public comment for item number 6.
Real quick, so
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Lewis actually seconded the agenda approval item. I was gonna ask if you all don't mind redoing that vote. We can,
I saw.
you actually initiate, it would have to be a new one.
Commissioner Wright,
I'll
you
move
have
to, y'all second, yeah. Whatever has to be done.
So, Commissioner Wolf moved and Commissioner Wright seconded.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have to finish the revote after we.
If everyone could just, you could just do a hand revote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that again.
Alright, moving on to agenda item number 6, discussion of possible action to adopt the CDBG subcommittee recommendations for FY 2020 community agency request for proposals funding.
So Rhianna actually coordinates the CDBG subcommittee, but we were going to ask Thomas as chair if he could present out on the subcommittee recommendations. Is that okay, Thomas?
I would be happy to. I'm probably not the better qualified person to give an explanation of the program in general. But each year we have these community agency RFPs. I hope that you have read the memo. They're in these various areas. We go over the applications, and we make recommendations as to which applications to fund and which not to. The program is generally oversubscribed. That is, the number of asks that we get is larger than the amount of money available. An agency that has been a longtime provider of rehabilitation services for lower income homeowners and so forth. At the last minute withdrew their application, and the alternative was Habitat for Humanity. So there's that shift in funding. Another difficulty is that two very long-standing service providers rebuilding together and intercity services. We both for both of those agencies, we're recommending no longer funding them, not funding them this round. And that's a difficult choice, but both of these agencies have struggled in two different ways. One of them has struggled to rebuild its executive capacity and therefore its capacity to fulfill its obligations to provide cleanly accountable, just clean accounting to the contract manager for the city, and that would be rebuilding together. They were kind of in the same situation 2 years ago. It's 2 years later. It really hasn't changed. Their ask was very large. The money was very tight. It just doesn't seem like we can go forward with that anymore. With intercity services, their activity in the community is well reputed and highly valued, at least by the people I anecdotally know. But there again, there's sort of a disconnect between the application and the accounting. There's a lot of difficulty with managing the contract, and we couldn't see going forward with that. That creates some geographic disparities, and that potentially creates some racial disparities and some communities of need disparities in how these funds are allocated. So that's an issue to consider, but nevertheless, these are the recommendations that we have. I have some other comments to make, taking off the chair of the subcommittee hat, but I'll make those later during discussion. That's just the introduction of where we're at.
Yeah, that was great.
So I think that'll take us to the public comment.
No, we did not do public comment on this.
I think we have members of the
Were
public.
these recommendations made public before this meeting? The recommendations of the subcommittee?
So that's a question, so you back and forth in public comment.
I'll allow it for the purpose of this. It's an open question. So the subcommittee meetings are publicly noticed as is required by both the Brown Act and the city's reporting requirements. So through the form of those notice requirements, yes, they're publicly noticed. I mean, I didn't see the specific notice on this case, but that's the process we follow.
But the recommendations were not public. I mean, one would have had to attend the meeting to know what the recommendations were. Is that right?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, we had some turnover in the membership of the commission. And that meant that the timing of the subcommittee meeting in which we made the recommendations was delayed until after the deadline for putting the recommendations in the packet for tonight's meeting. The recommendations, the memo from the subcommittee is public record, and we have copies here tonight. And we apologize that it wasn't in the packet. That was just kind of, again, this problem of turnover in the membership of the commission that led to that problem. Mike, do you have extra copies handy, or?
There should be copies on the table.
Yeah. And we did actually, the meetings are noticed, and in fact, we had one applicant from the Berkeley Music Group who attended one of our meetings.
So my first comment is on process, piggyback on some of that. So this is the first time I've seen it, and I think that's completely unacceptable. I really don't feel comfortable this body making a decision on this night. This is, $2 million something, and I'm literally crunching numbers while people are talking on other items, and when we're making what I think is a really controversial decision to zero out two entities that I think have done a lot of good work in the community. So I am leaning towards we shouldn't touch this tonight, and that I think we all need to dig into this, and that it's not really acceptable to be seeing this for the first time tonight. So that's, I'm not gonna make a motion right now, but I'm curious on what other people feel, but that is my feeling.
Commissioner Wolf and Commissioner Trigg with Commissioner Wright.
Well, I am also interested, especially since this is, I think, a 4-year funding cycle now. So I sort of would have liked to do a little background, like for one example is Rebuilding Together, which is the group that is not being recommended. I'm confused because there's also an organization where people come in and they donate their services and help fix it up. Is that Rebuilding Together?
Yes, that's right, and it's a tremendous service, and it
Yeah.
has these institutions.
So why are they no longer good? I'd like.
So, yeah.
I want to keep order, so I'll take the
We'll go
chair's
back,
guidance.
we'll cycle back around to you, just put your name on the sheet.
All right, so there's, because that I thought was a way of saving money for people, and a whole bunch of people would show up and repaint a house, and they would do all this, and they were usually supervised by contractors, so that's what I was a little surprised to see.
Commissioner Trigg.
Two process questions. One, and more importantly, maybe this is a question for staff. If we took no action tonight and deferred it to next month, what would be the implications? When do these recommendations need to get to council by?
Please.
So these go these recommendations go into our council item with the annual action plan, which is our next agenda item that I'll be going over. And that is on the council agenda for April 23rd. And staff has to include our council item with our recommendations and the commission's recommendations by March 21st. We have to have that to the clerk.
Given the specific nature and very unique nature of this, and I completely trust the folks on the subcommittee. I trust that they did due diligence. It's just that we just received this tonight. Might it be possible for this particular year for us to consider this in April and then just provide a supplemental report to the council? That'll still be, I guess, about 15 to 20 days before council meeting.
I don't know. I haven't had that happen before. It will certainly complicate the process, but if the commission doesn't feel comfortable making that decision, I think if I recall, in some years past, the commission has actually scheduled a special meeting to then vote when we've had these kind of scheduling issues, but I wasn't part of those processes in the past, so that's also possible.
Thank you. So Commissioner Wright in the queue, then Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg, Commissioner Lord, and then myself.
I'm still reflecting on the last point that was made. But in essence, Commissioner Traeger pretty much covered my question. Was basically, is this time sensitive, and how soon do we need to pass it? But it sounds like you're looking for a decision tonight.
We were hoping for that, yes.
Okay. So then I would pose the question to the commission: are we comfortable moving forward with the recommendations made by the subcommittee? Or especially, I guess, Commissioner Franco, since you raised the question.
So, no, I'm not prepared to approve these as is.
Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg.
I guess I just had specific questions. East Bay Community Law Center, did they not apply at all? And do we know why? Were they aware?
Can I answer? Yeah. Yeah, they actually came to us and told us that they were not going to be applying for that. So we knew that, and then we had another provider apply. So fair housing is one of our requirements under HUD, so we were grateful for.
I mean, my concern is just that we have a Section 8, like you can't discriminate against people with Section 8. We still don't even have somebody to accept complaints, and, Eden doesn't even have an office in Berkeley, and I'm just very, yeah, I mean, that is not where I would, yeah, I'm just concerned about, I mean, obviously, if the organization doesn't wanna do it, you can't thrust money on them, but, you know, I would, yeah, I don't know, there's not a lot of service agencies, but yeah, one that actually has an office that people can get to, instead of, because I think they just have a phone, and I don't, yeah. I'm concerned about that as being, you know, we just don't, we have a dearth of ability to complain around fair housing things. I'd almost rather the city, take the city attorney's office, take the $34,000. I'm not sure we cover anything, but, I mean, it's also really frustrating that that's all we're, has that historically been the amount? I mean, I think if we had probably provided the amount you'd actually need to do fair housing for a city our size, that probably somebody would, you know, they would have applied. Has that always been the amount that we?
That has been the amount for the last number of years, and, you know, Eden applied for 35,000.
Yeah.
So, you know, we don't direct the amount that folks put in their application by any means.
So next thing you have Commissioner Lord, and then myself.
So, a few things. First of all, I'm completely sympathetic with the fact that the memo was not included in the packet. I think it's very reasonable and responsibly concerned. I'd like to suggest that one possibility is that we could pass along the recommendations tonight as preliminary recommendations. That frees up staff to do their work. And in April, we can, if there is, after further examination, objection to those, we can revise our stance and we can send a communication to council in time for the actual meeting. So that's just an approach to keep in mind that may balance the legitimate concerns with the needs of the process. Let's see, I think the question about Eden and CSC has been answered. We're building together. The subcommittee felt very much as you do. And we feel, in our discussion, I think it's fair to say that we feel this is a big loss, exactly for the reasons you say. This is a voluntary organization. It helps to build a network of cooperation in the community. It's just the right way to do things. But the problem is, this organization is sort of a really tiny one and has not been able to find an executive director. Okay? Yeah, for like 2 years. So there's an acting executive director, but hasn't been able to hire permanently. As a result, its accounting systems are just not quite there to the point where the city does not feel comfortable, just won't use federal CDBG money for this. That is, their accounting won't pass the sort of test of that HUD puts to this money. Not that they're doing, I'm not making any accusations against them. I'm just saying things aren't in order at sort of that degree. So it would have to be funded out of general funds. It's difficult to put together enough funds to even keep them in business, is our understanding. Okay, and so this may be the end of the road for that organization. And my God, to the community, if any of you want to, you know, reach out to that organization or start a similar one and help rebuild it outside of this process, please do so. I think it's a widely respected group of people. Can certainly use help, but our feeling was that we really can't help it through this particular program. And the last thing I wanted to say, and this is me now, not representing the subcommittee, but representing myself. And there is a tremendous need that the city of Berkeley has for a rehabilitation program that helps people of limited means rehabilitate their homes and so on. And we had this long-standing provider who I understand has done constantly good work, been very reliable, back out at the last second. 2 days before our subcommittee meeting, they withdrew their application. And that left us with really very little choice but to go with what looks to be a very professional organization, the Habitat for Humanity provider. And I think that their application was fantastic, okay? It's a differently structured program, but they also have a good reputation. As an individual, I would actually, as a point of privilege, like to if we're gonna vote on this tonight, to sever all of the recommendations from that one for Habitat for Humanity. And the reason is because the facts of Mr. Powell's case are not fully clear to me yet, other than it was Habitat who did a lot of the work that raised the price of rehabilitation for his house. And I have questions now about what their relationship was to the homeowner that allowed that to happen. And so I cannot, in good conscience, I want to abstain on funding them until I have more information, okay? But we're also still in a bind because that is a desperately needed service. That's a $250,000 service, and they're the only player on the table right now. So it's a really difficult situation, and that's all I wanted to add. Hope that was helpful.
So the only thing that I wanted to add at this point, I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel, but I would feel comfortable calling a special meeting to just revisit this question if people have time to do that, where it's hopefully timely so we can get a report out to the city council, but also give better notice and better time for us to review these decisions, because I personally wouldn't feel comfortable making these recommendations having just seen them today. But I don't know if others feel that way as well, so that's all I want to put that out there. Oh, and process-wise, I want to make kind of explicit what I've sort of been in my mind doing in terms of how the meeting's being run. So what I'm trying to do is, like, whenever your name is the one that's up for speaking, I kind of just let you be like the ruler of your own kingdom. If you want to ask questions to someone in the audience, I just kind of give you that space to do that, so you felt like you utilized your time period. So I just want to make that explicit, that that's kind of what I've been doing. So when it's someone's turn to be on call, they pretty much have the realm to do what they want to do. So with that, I also need the pronunciation for your name.
Abdishine.
Abdishine. The Commissioner Shrek goes next.
Sorry. I want a clarification with staff on something Commissioner Lord said about rebuilding together East Bay's accounting not being able to survive HUD standards. Is that your conclusion also?
Yeah, when we are using CDBG with our programs, we really need to make sure that they are tracking and keeping all program files and fiscal accounting records with all of the necessary supporting documentation. And because of the infrastructure of the organization, we've done our internal monitoring, and it's been difficult to determine some of the supporting documentation from this organization. So we also feel that the need is there in the community, and the service that's being provided in the community is very valuable, but it's not an appropriate use of CDBG funds, which puts us at great risk for losing other CDBG funds if we don't have all of the supporting documentation.
Commissioner Abdishine.
So I am just a little uncomfortable at looking at the inner city services losing all of their funding after having it last year. And
Could you speak up?
Could you speak up, please? Yes, sorry. And I think I'm just like hearing about the racial implications that this obviously has. I just am interested in knowing more about the process of actually figuring out whether an org deserves to continue having funding and like what you take into account to cut that out. I know the applications are due in January. This is like a 2-month long process for you to figure that out. So I'm just interested if you have anything more to say about that.
So the process, the applications are due in January. Then the commissions review the applications as well as staff. So we each come to our own conclusions. We have an application, an evaluation, and that informs the discussion that we move forward with. That the application also includes a monitor evaluation of the prior performance of the organization, as well as the agency answers all of the application questions so they can speak to their program themselves. So that is the process for what that looks like. And was that the full question?
Yeah, I think I also just wanna know what you mean by prior performance, like what do you take into account?
So we look at things like, are reports accurate? Are they submitted on time? Is there good communication with the program monitor? Are their statements of expense accurate? Are they spending all of their money? Things like that.
Commissioner Wolf?
Well, I'm gonna sort of, present, maybe not a very popular suggestion, but I'm gonna say it. I've worked with Habitat, myself in a variety of locations, and I've never found them to be a disappointing group. And I still don't know all the details of what went on with Mr. Powell, and I'm not gonna assume it was Habitat's fault, that there could be an intermediary that wasn't behaving responsibly. There's a real benefit to approving something that's already so detailed, and that was my only question, had to be with why Rebuilding Together had been dropped. And it's been explained to me now, and I guess I would be in favor of approving the recommendations in the subcommittee, because we've got a lot of other kinds of business to handle as the HAC. And I know these subcommittees, I've worked on the CDBG subcommittee, and they are very thorough in investigating things, visiting locations, getting a lot of staff input, and I think this is just sort of drawing out a process. And I guess I would be in favor of approving their recommendations.
Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg, Commissioner Prgm?
I guess, the organization, you were saying that there was an organization that withdrew, that had applied, and then Habitat did it at the last minute, and then also with EBCLC. I mean, I do know that for these small amounts, the CDBG money it's a very cumbersome process because the federal government does that. I don't think it's Berkeley that's doing it, but I just wondered if there was, I just think that's something we need to think through in terms of kind of the huge amounts that were given to one organization and then smaller amounts, and then especially because the amount of paperwork, it doesn't matter if you're getting $10 or you're getting 100,000, it's the same amount of work. And do we know why that other organization pulled their? I don't know.
Community Energy Services Corporation withdrew their application because they're actually closing their organization.
Oh, well, I guess that works. That doesn't fall into that category. Yeah, I mean, I guess, and it's probably not appropriate, but I guess I would want to revisit. I guess I'm very concerned that we're not going to have effective fair housing services here. I'm very concerned about that, and I just.
So is it possible? Is it possible to have fair housing services pulled out as an important service and not have to assume CDBG will cover it?
The CDBG has to give. Is there a percentage it has to be provided?
Not that
I mean, I guess I would move to that we should be spending $150,000 on fair housing, and we would re-solicit for the, for the bid. That's not realistic because the time frame's totally off. But this is for the next 4 years. Is this the budget?
That's correct. And so, as I mentioned, we don't say, we have $35,000 for fair housing. We invite folks to come to our workshop, and these are the categories of services we're looking to fund. And please apply for a good, solid program and the amount that you feel you need to execute this program.
Yeah.
So this is what we received. We got one provider for fair housing, and they said that they could do this program for $35,000.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be, disparaging of organizations, but there's a reason. I guess I know that there were expressions of doing it later because we want to know more. I guess my frustration is, and I wasn't on the commission, and I wasn't, because of my email confusion, wasn't aware of the prior meeting. But much of what we're talking about is anti-displacement, and fair housing is kind of the old-fashioned word for trying to stop displacement. Anyway, I don't know anything to say, because I don't know doesn't seem to be a solution for that.
So after, I have Commissioner Trego next, and Commissioner Lord, and Commissioner Schrenko.
Yeah. So first of all, on the substance itself, maybe staff can help me with this. I do remember in the past being on this subcommittee, and I believe what the subcommittee ended up recommending then with inner city services, and it was kind of the same concern as I recall, but it wasn't to zero out funding, whether it was to fund it at a lower level, but to still give it some funding. You have a longer institutional memory than me. Can you confirm?
So
Not
this
possible.
was the last round?
That was maybe 2 rounds ago.
2 rounds ago, okay, so it wasn't in the process 2 rounds ago, but it's my memory that ICS has been getting the 100,000 approximately for a few years now, a couple rounds at least. They did apply last cycle also for about $200,000, so they applied for more, but it was determined to keep them at level funding and not reduce their funding last cycle.
Maybe that's what I am.
Yeah, so that's what I remember.
I think in the interest of time, I know this is going to be a balancing act. I understand the reason for expediting this, but to me, and I think to many of my colleagues, if not all of them, I think all of them, having a good, clean process is more important than, taking the time to make sure that there is the feeling both on our commission and within the community that we are looking at the same thing, that we have a robust opportunity for discussion, and that the public does as well is really important. So I know also that we have a full agenda tonight. What I would propose is that we either schedule a special meeting. This is along with Chair Johnson's comments. I agree with them. I would also propose that we try not to schedule on the fly right now, but that staff separately reach out to us and let's see if there's a date that works for all of us. If not, then we may have to meet in April and discuss this. And I understand and appreciate the desire to move this forward. And this was a very unique set of circumstances. I personally want to review some of these funding proposals, particularly from ICS, and before I can make a determination whether I agree with the subcommittee's recommendation. I have one last question for staff actually. Was the subcommittee's recommendation the same as the staff's recommendation?
So staff is also a little bit behind in our recommendations, and so we're not able to share where we are with our thinking on that, but it will come forth in the annual action plan recommendation.
I think for the reason you just stated, this is another reason why I think it would be a good idea to defer this to a future meeting.
So it's likely that we won't also be able to share the staff recommendation at that time either. So it becomes public when we go to the annual action plan.
Thank you.
Right.
I'll stop there.
Just for the purposes of our meeting process, one of the suggestions that we had before, most of you were on the commission at the time, was that we make a specific motion so we can discuss the actual motion to move the meeting forward. I just want to bring that out as I give the floor to Commissioner Lord. And then after that, I have Commissioner Schrenko, Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg, and Commissioner Wolf.
Okay, a couple of things. First of all, the concerns about fair housing, and you also applied last round. You preferred ECLC for some of the reasons, and me say that it is the subcommittee's understanding that the application that they submitted, which is extremely similar to the application they submitted 2 years ago, is quite divergent from what they're actually doing. There's a lot of reused material from past years, things they used to do but no longer do, and so on. And it is the subcommittee's understanding that there is simply not enough documentation to verify the placement outcomes to job placement sort of thing. That the placement outcomes they assert are true. I'm not saying that they are defrauding or that they're doing anything wrong, but I'm saying that this long-standing problem of being able to verify these outcomes has persisted over the past few years and is still here. And the argument that I personally made at the subcommittee, because I fought for this organization last year. The reason we continued them at about the level they were was because I fought for it. We were going to give them even less. I mean, there was strong sentiment to give them less than that. Okay. But my thought at this point, hearing the monitor's report, having some discussions, looking into it, is two things. First of all, they have recently won a very large award, larger than what we're talking about here, from the Veterans Administration. This organization, as far as I can tell, is not in jeopardy of going anywhere. And that if they were to be given this funding at this time in this way, that there is a fiduciary risk both to the city and to ICS itself. And my feeling was, I'm not sure we would actually be doing them a favor by giving them this particular funding under this contract based on that application and based on the reports of past performance. That being said, all the reluctance here with this process and with the profound implications of losing those two agencies in particular, I'm fully on board. If people want to have a special meeting, I support that. If people want to move forward with this tonight, this difficulty doesn't go away. We can bring it back in April, plus it's going to come up before council. We don't make final decisions here. I think it's really important that, I think it's great that these complexities and difficulties and the challenges they provide, the difficult equity questions that arise, the problematic nature of the whole CDBG and community agency process is exposed by this, and this is great, okay? There's no easy answer here. So I'm flexible, whatever you guys want to do. If you want to have a special meeting, let's have a special meeting. If you're okay passing this forward, let's pass it forward. Like I said, I'm staying on Habitat. Thank you.
Commissioner Sharanko, then Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg, and Commissioner Wolf.
So real quick comment, then I'm gonna make a motion so we can move forward. So real quick on rebuilding together. So you talked about in your city and how they have other money, they're probably gonna survive. Rebuilding together is my understanding their entire budget is about $200K. So this is existential for them. Like we'd be wiping them off the map pretty much. One less organization helping low-income people keep their houses. And so I think I want to give them every effort to make their case so that we can give them this money and then keep doing the wonderful work they've been doing for 25 plus years. So my motion is for a special meeting to be determined. I'm happy to follow the guidelines that Igor gave and staff can schedule either late this month or early next month, just before our next regularly scheduled meeting. That's my motion.
Second. I'm just gonna do this. Is there any opposition to that?
Well,
if there is, we'll do a vote.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if we will be able to actually have anything for the council meeting, even with a special meeting. And if I mean, I guess I feel like the process is not doing well if we're hearing that staff hasn't made recommendations yet either. I mean, I'm willing to adopt this right now and not have a special meeting on this because, this is normally something we depend on the subcommittee, and that's why we have it. And it's normally sort of a slam dunk kind of thing.
I understand, that's fair, but like, I am only seeing this now, and I'm gonna abstain if there's a vote. Like, I can't rubber
You
stamp
made a
this.
motion.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying, if there's a substitute motion, I have to approve, I'm saying, but so that's why I want the special meeting.
So there's been a motion made, it's been seconded, so at this point we're in discussion on the main motion of doing the special meeting. Is there any other discussion as to the motion of doing a special meeting for this?
Can I ask a question of staff that will inform what I think about the motion?
Yeah.
Is it typical that the recommendations from staff are done so far after when we do this?
Well, it's not abnormal where we are in our process. So what we do is staff reviews the applications, we review it, through our kind of chain of command and our review process. We cultivate things, we hear what the commissions are doing, there's 4 commissions working on this, we kind of balance it out, and then we draft recommendations, and those get approved through our process, through, the city manager's office. So these recommendations have to come through the city manager, and we can't make them public in that way until the council report is public, yeah.
So and then there's in addition to our committee, there are 3 other committees and other different commissions going through the exact same process?
Exactly, they're not reviewing these applications, they're reviewing other sets of applications. You guys are reviewing the applications that pertain to our HUD funding, CDBG funding,
okay,
and
I was thinking, that's great. I thought
Yeah,
there were 4 other
no.
committees doing the CDBG. I'm sorry, okay, that
Yeah.
makes a little more sense.
And there's a pot of general fund in this commission as well, but the majority of our guidelines are constrained by the CDBG for this commission.
But just to clarify, so then it's typical that the committee would meet with information from staff, but not the actual recommendation.
Well, information,
Well, I understood that staff didn't think that it sounded like there were the source of the information that the way that I'm assuming invoicing and reporting was being done was not sufficient, and we had concerns, I assume came from staff. And so that must have been in some was that an informal discussion, or is that a part of the presentation at the subcommittee?
yes, so that is part of the subcommittee. Staff is present at the subcommittee meetings that reviews all of these applications. We help facilitate the process. We go through, the structure of our funding and where the caps are, how we can allocate to public services, housing services, facilities. So we go through all of that, review the applications, provide assistance and kind of guidance if needed, and then answer questions related to specific applications.
Fair to say that some of your recommendation comes out in those conversations?
I would say we do what we can as our monitoring staff to share as much information as we can.
I guess I'm just, because what I'm nervous about is that there being totally 2 conversations when we have so many concerns. So, but is that information?
We share all of that information back with our other staff. So we're we listen really hard, and we try to, as much as possible, align our recommendations with commission, because that makes it easier for council. Sometimes there's a piece that we feel like we can't really align this way, but everything else we're aligned with, so we really try to do that in all of the commissions that we work with. And sometimes it's not possible, but we do.
And is there a point at which you let us know that before? Because it does feel a little strange to have, if we vote on something, and then, especially when it's this controversial, and then it turns out you actually thought it was a crazy idea anyway. Do you let us know, or do we just find out by reading them?
Well, I don't have the authority to say that, to let, to provide our recommendations beforehand.
There's a scoring system for these
No, I understand. Why are we doing this?
Do we have a motion
So,
on the floor?
there is a motion on the floor, there are still people in the queue for discussion for the purposes of the motion. To the member of the public, so we've done the public comment already on this section, so we're in the discussion as a commission.
This isn't public comment though, it's right on point with the timelines. If because I'm a chair of another commission, and generally all the commissions report at the same time to council, and so I wanted to just state that I was advised that we had to have our commission report, our commission homeless. They've already had initial discussions on our recommendations with the city manager, but on the 14th, I was told I have to have the commissions reported by the 14th, because both the commissions and staff are bringing their individual reports back to the city manager on the 15th. So I just want to advise you of that that you know, if you're possibly, and then this goes before council in April, and generally all 4 commissions deliver their recommendations at the same time. So I wanted to just share that with you in case you're possibly missing the opportunity to give a recommendation at all. Thank you.
So I'm Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg is next. You just spoke, I just didn't question so Commissioner Wolf is next.
I think we need to move on. And I think we should, I'm calling the question for the vote as to whether or not we hold a special committee meeting and whether or not our recommendations get to council in time for the April meeting. Who knows? And who knows if the council will decide in April anyway. So I would say let's take a vote.
I'll second that call the question. So we'll just go to the question now. So we'll do a roll call vote.
Could you repeat the motion, please?
The motion is to do a special meeting. I think I can just do that as a chair anyway, but we'll
Okay.
do a motion for the special meeting.
Is this replacing the prior motion that was by
There was a motion by Commissioner
Alex Sharenko?
It was Sharenko and Wright.
Yeah.
And they
that
just
was
called
fine.
it to question.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Can I give a friendly amendment?
I'm open to hearing.
Can I propose? I would just that, we ask Habitat for Humanity to come and explain to us the circumstances of the relationship with Mr. Powell.
I hope all these people are there. I hope, and if the chair wants to reach out to those institutions and invite them, inform them, invite them to come, I'd like to give people a word.
Just more or less a 9-hour meeting.
I would like to do that. I would love to do that.
So I'm gonna accept that. I think it's not, and not just with Habitat for Humanity, but I'm gonna encourage the chair. I accept as a friendly amendment, encouraging the chair to reach out to these institutions that this meeting is happening and that we would like them to do it. How about that?
Can I propose an add-on? that
Sure,
we
let's hear it.
encourage staff to reach out
Okay,
to
good. Fair. I don't hear you.
once we have a meeting.
You're welcome.
I'm very friendly to that.
You get the thank you.
So before we conduct the RFP process, we do come to the commissions, and at that point we say, you know, this is your opportunity to, if you want to or need to, do site visits. We don't do site visits and usually have agencies come to the commission during the application process, unless, you know, it has to be open and fair. So if that was going to happen, you really would need to have the invitation to everybody. If they're, and I hope I'm speaking correctly here, but you know, as the subcommittee, we've going through these applications, there's questions, so we've asked clarifying questions to the agencies to help inform that decision. But I really, it would be a hard recommendation to have them come to the meeting and present. I hear your concerns, and I do hear what you have to say,
Can I
yeah.
just rephrase the friendly amendment to be, that you ask Habitat Humanity to explain their role or interaction with, Mr. Powell's house?
Yeah, I don't accept that.
So, okay, so I think from my understanding of the process and the concerns and the legal significance of this report and things like that, I think I'm obliged to make a substitute motion. One that I think probably won't be popular, but please hear me out. My understanding is that our making recommendations, them being on time, them being part of the report, is essential to protecting our CDBG funding in future years. I think the concerns raised here about the particular issues this year are legitimate, and I encourage us to continue to work on that. substitute motion is that we have either a special meeting or a meeting in April. Either a special meeting as, depending on kind of consensus here, as requested, or we take this up again in April. But that the special meeting or the April meeting will be to amend our recommendations. That we make these recommendations tonight just simply to protect the integrity of the CDBG process, and that we amend them because of the very serious, real social concerns raised by this. By the way, the question arose, how much of this stuff is just conversation during the subcommittee meetings? There is a public record, the scoring system that includes a monitor's report. The discussion that we had really sort of elaborated, but mostly sort of confirmed what's in the written monitor's report. So there is that record, and I'm sure you could probably get a copy of that. And have it.
I just was trying to understand that really.
Yeah. So I'm gonna move the recommendations.
Can we adopt the report?
That we adopted.
So that was the substitute motion, so Commissioner
And
Ferguson
if it is the will of the commission to, in addition to that, have a special meeting to amend our recommendations in a subsequent conversation, I'm there. I'm for that.
Let's substitute, we vote on that first.
Is there a second?
If there's a second, sure.
I'd like to hear from the staff on the question about can we even, if we don't pass anything now, does that preclude us from making
So,
anything else?
so these recommendations, the recommendation for how we spend our CDBG funding goes into the annual action plan, which is our next agenda item. And that annual action plan has to be adopted by council in April because our report to HUD is due in May 15th. So council has to make a determination on how we spend our CDBG funding. And we would like the HAC's recommendation to be part of those. You know, if you have a subsequent meeting, then that will have to kind of slip into the process, but it is not as clean. We are having our meeting with the city manager next Friday. We're hoping to have everything together by then. But if you are not comfortable, then we're not there. So then we would have to have an attachment to the council. I'm not sure how that happens outside of this process.
Then I will second the substitute motion.
Just to pass this.
Can you,
So the substitute motion
Thank you.
is to basically pass the recommendation as decided by the CDBG committee, but then to also do a special meeting or discuss this in the April meeting.
So sort of conditional passage.
Basically conditional passage, but
Roll call? Go ahead.
is there any more discussion? Seeing none, I'm moving to roll call vote.
Okay. Commissioner Abdushayan?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Johnson?
Yes.
Lord?
Yes.
Sharenko?
No.
Simon-Wiseberg?
Yes.
Prgm?
Pass.
Wolf?
Yes.
Wright?
Yes.
Point of information, is pass an abstention or is
No.
pass a yes?
Comes back.
Comes
No.
back to Prgm.
Come back to me.
Sounds like I'm staying.
Prgm.
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay. Motion passes with 6 votes.
Well, so does that pass the substitute motion itself or no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to vote on the whole motion.
No,
That's it, and,
That's it.
thank you everyone for caring.
So, question now, can we go ahead and, we have to decide if we want a special meeting or
I mean,
if we
I'm definitely gonna do a special.
or if we
meeting.
want to just do April.
I'm just gonna call a special meeting.
Yeah.
You,
I
that's
thought
chair,
that's part
chair's
of the
prerogative,
motion.
I'll leave that to you, chair's prerogative.
I can coordinate with the city and then can I send out like a doodle poll?
yeah, I can work with you and I'll organize it through the HAC email.
Okay.
Motion to extend to 9:30. I
Yes.
forget when exactly we do that, but it's like
Now
April.
is the time.
We just
extend the meeting till 10 p.m., seconded by Commissioner Triggle. And good call. All right, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of extending the meeting until 10?
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. We will now move on to agenda item number 7.
So, this is still in the purview of the great Rhianna Babka.
Okay, thank you, commissioners, for having us here tonight, and I appreciate your patience and review of everything so thoroughly. So, tonight, I just want to speak to you about our annual action plan. I think some of you are more familiar with this maybe than others who are newer to the commission, but the City of Berkeley receives HUD funding as an entitlement jurisdiction, and as an entitlement jurisdiction, we prepare a 5-year consolidated plan that tells HUD how we are going to spend our HUD funds, and those come in the form of community development block grant funding, the Home Investment Partnership Program, and Emergency Solutions Grant. So every year, as part of that 5-year consolidated plan, we provide a plan to HUD on how we're going to spend our funds for that year. Now, you received a link in your packet with mention that the HAC CDBG subcommittee and staff are reviewing the CDBG applications right now that get kind of rolled up into this plan, and a link to the actual draft plan itself. So the draft plan is still very much in draft form in terms of our allocation, because one, we do not yet have our HUD allocation. So we still proceed because until we are advised further, our due date for the annual action plan is still May 15th, even though we have not received our HUD funds. So occasionally when there is a delay in us receiving those amounts, then we have an extension, but we haven't received that yet. So we proceed with our April and May timeline. So one, we always assume a slight decrease with our CDBG funds, because over the years that's the trend with CDBG funds. As more jurisdictions are eligible and receive the funds, kind of those get a little bit watered down. And then you'll see that the home funds and the ESG funds are estimated to be the same. So we have these estimated amounts, and those will get revised and finalized as we get our actual allocation. So the annual action plan that you received and that you would be looking at is for PY planning year 19, which corresponds to the city's fiscal year 20, so starting July 1 of 2019. And this is the last year of the 5 years in the consolidated plan. On page 3, you'll see a kind of a summary of the plan. It has maybe our draft allocations here. And again, they're broken out into different categories. The plan covers 7 project areas that are related to the goals that are identified in the consolidated plan. So those are related to our planning and administration fees, public facility rehabilitation, public services, housing services, community facility rehabilitation, the Housing Trust Fund, and ESG. So once we have made the final recommendation for how we're spending the money that's going out into the community based on the community RFP process, those both those organizations, the actual amounts, and the number of people that are served, that are proposed to be served, will be populated into this plan. So right now you kind of see a shell for some of those pieces. This plan will be still in draft form when it goes to council, but at that time we will have at least our full recommendations for how we're spending the CDBG funds as part of the RFP process. So those will be inserted in this plan. And then what we say to council is these are our recommendations, this is our plan, and should the amount be greater or less than this, that comes out of the public facility pocket of money, because right now we're estimating that between all of our CDBG allocation and program income that we potentially would have about $1 million for the public facility fund. So that's our flexible piece. If we receive more CDBG funds than we've estimated, we add it to that pot. If we receive less, we take it away so that it wouldn't take away from some of the public services that you've reviewed and that staff have reviewed through the RFP process. So this plan is largely kind of in structure and form the same as the last 4 years, and the only changes that we would see are the organizations to whom we are going to be allocating the CDBG funds and the numbers and counts of people that they're serving. So tonight, we're recommending that the HAC would approve this as to form to go to council for their review, and then we submit this in our final draft to council for the April 23rd meeting, to submit to HUD by May. And then once we have our final allocation, we post the final annual action plan on the website for the public.
Commissioner Wolf is in the queue first, and then Commissioner Trigger.
I move that we adopt this plan.
It's been a motion and I don't know who seconded it.
I did.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move to a roll call vote.
Commissioner Abdushayan?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Lord?
Yes.
Sharenko?
Yes.
Simon-Wiseberg?
Yes.
Tregu?
Yes.
Wolf?
Yes.
Wright?
Yes.
Motion passes.
So, the next item on the agenda is a presentation from Theo Ferguson.
Michael, could I borrow that copy that I gave you, and then all the commissioners will have one?
Sure.
Just that single page?
Oh, yeah, it is in the binder.
Okay, all right. So, I want to thank the commission for the opportunity to bring something quite different to you tonight. And what I've done is I've provided you with some, thank you so much, support materials. So there is a very particular request from Chairman Johnson that we have some potential next steps and items to kind of continue to generate the energy. If you guys would good enough to pass this down to your colleagues, I'd appreciate it. My name is Theo Ferguson, and I'm part of an activity which is a community-based invention, where in 1979, we looked around and we thought, you know, housing is really a problem. And we thought, well, no, wait a minute, we don't have very much money, but we can talk to each other. And so why don't we get together and take some of the older housing stock, you know, those beautiful heritage cultural things that are falling rack to ruin, and, you know, see if we can work together to afford to build them back up into a place we could call home. And so we did. Took us, we're now in year 38. We've gone through 15 sets of partners. In your little handout, there's some positive and negatives with reference to the fact that we started as a tenants in common. And then when then Mayor Hancock wanted a 3% mitigation tax for those of us who wanted to convert to condominiums, we discovered, since, you know, if you work with 9 people, working 600 is not really very different, even though we didn't have email. And we found that we were 60% single women and 30% single mothers. We were the low and middle income people that Mayor Hansen was trying to support. So we got 100% of the city council to drop the mitigation fee. And there have been quite a few successful condominiums that have been formed since then. And all these condominiums were based on refurbished old houses. Now, in my experience with the California Economic Summit, every time housing is brought up, it's always brought up by real estate agents. And you know, the bottom line is people live and they should have the opportunity to find each other, to work together, and to create beautiful homes together. There's some challenges, which are on the back of the kind of discussion piece which I gave you, and that is that, you know, when you get a lot of people that love their home, they put a lot of energy and time and money in it. And damn it, it turns out gentrifying the neighborhood. And that was not what we had in mind. But it seems to me that with a little bit of, you know, kind of push and shove and an understanding about educating people about how to do things like plumbing, construction, electricity, accounting, management, communication development, fundamental roles, interaction with their city zoning personnel and the laws and dynamics in a relationship around housing, which is what you have to do, that people could become not only housed, but they could be actors in the creation of their own lives. And I'll tell you what, there's no community activity that is more valuable than people creating their own sense of community. So what I've done is I've given you a lot of back stuff, and then a couple of differences between tenants and common positive aspects and negative aspects, condominium positive aspect and negative aspects, because it doesn't really matter what the governance format is. There are positive and negatives on both parts. So the business is all about relationships. It's about your ability to interact, be respectful, be kind, and be responsible for others. For 16 years, we worked as 100% consensus. It's a really good exercise for people to work with 100% consensus. No means no. It means no politicizing, just no. And that means that you have to think again, and believe it or not, so much of the time, that better idea comes up after going through that process. So all I can tell you is I have a bunch of suggestions that I think would be very effective. I think it would be very sad if we left our biodegrading, beautiful old houses and not made them available with some kind of shared education activity that could even include something like, you know, the kind of mentoring that you have, or even, you know, a practice. You know, when you, I'm in food and farming, and you start with, you know, sitting in a room and talking about soil principles, but eventually go out there and you get some, you know, good amount of stuff on your hands. But having a practice, we have a tool library. We have, I guess that Rebuilding Together used to be called Christmas in April or something.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, I worked on that for years. It was awesome, you know, and I really think that a combination of a Christmas in April and working with the tool library and, you know, basically using that as a practice for anyone who wants to undertake that kind of thing would be dandy. It is not up to me to do anything except suggest and encourage that we take our heritage, cultural, older houses and see if we can't find some very interesting people who are willing to build them up together. There's a lot more in that, and I stand ready for any questions that you have based on the 38 years of experience that I've had.
So Commissioner Wolf, thank you.
Well, I think this is great, and I'm a little unclear what you're asking the city for.
I'm only asking the city to think of a whole other new vector to get people into houses, rather than them paying for it, or rather than, you know, getting, you know, HUD money for it, and just let the people, enable people to be able to be creative on their own hook.
Then I want to say two other things.
Yeah.
How do you feel about income restrictions? Because we normally don't give money to an array of
I'm not
incomes.
asking you to give money at all.
Oh, just to encourage the model?
That's
By
correct.
through
And
advertising,
educate.
positive
And educate.
outreach?
Yes.
And the other thing I wanted to say is you'd asked about an inventory of available units, and
No, inventory of houses that need repair.
yeah, that's a tough one, because also what you're looking for is a house that might be on the market, so that you can buy it. And so that's why I think I may have emailed you, a nice good place to start is to see what the listings look like.
Okay, First of all, I want to mention, this is all about owner occupiers. This is all about buying these houses collectively.
No, I understand that, but you normally don't just knock on a door and say, you wanna sell your house to me?
The reason that I put the detail that I did about our process is that we went through 68 people through a year and a half to find a house that had 100% solar access, which was a requirement. I mean, I'm not saying that this is today or tomorrow.
What I would love to do is, you have a lot of words here. I would love to be able to work with you. I'm offering, if the commission's agreeable, to work with you to slim this down and make a 2-page proposal that then could be submitted to the city council after the HAC approved that brief proposal.
I
So
would
it
be
becomes an
delighted.
information item, it's something that's picked up on the internet, and you would go
I
in
would
that
be delighted
process.
to have people have the opportunity to create their own homes.
So next thing you have Commissioner Lord and Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg.
Sure, I was just gonna make a brief comment that one of the things we have started to talk about in the city, is, the city trying to acquire some of this older stock as it comes on the market, and also to having, at least exploring the possibility of having social housing. Social housing is publicly owned, but, it can be, cooperatively managed. And I'm really impressed by the way that you articulated this notion that communities self-create, that it's the self-activity of the community that makes the environments and the rules under which they live, that's a way to escape the sort of antagonistic relation of landlord and tenant, and to instead take responsibility for the environment. And I think the exact business model, the ownership models and things like that, there are many ways to do it. Condominiums are one way, and there's other,
Is another.
and there's
Yeah,
various other
So I'd like to give a
sort
little
of
bit of feedback both to you,
Yeah.
Commissioner Lord, and to you, Commissioner Ward. And that is that I think more than anything else, if it's framed properly, that this would really encourage people to say, oh, I'm in charge of it. And I don't see that very much, and I would love to see more of it. Are there any other questions or observations?
Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg in the queue next, and Commissioner Prgm. Commissioner Prgm.
I'd like to thank Theo, first of all, for coming and for giving a wonderful tour of your house back in December.
You're
For
all
anyone who has not had that opportunity, please, if you're willing to take
Oh,
other
absolutely,
folks
delighted, it's
on a
absolutely
tour.
gorgeous.
I
It was a
would-
mess when we bought it, and it is not.
I want to help a lot from that tour. I think this is great, that you are going to work with, Vice Chair Wolf to come up with a
It'd be
list
my
of
honor.
proposals.
Indeed.
I can't think of anyone better to synthesize this. And we used to have a moderate income subcommittee, on the HAC. I think some of these proposals could directly factor into concrete recommendations that we could send to the council. I have one question for you.
Sure.
In the near future, we might be talking about revising, our mitigation fee schedule for both condo conversions and maybe tenancies in common. Since you, I think, had both structures at different times, do you have any comments on that?
On the back of the piece that I just gave you, I have some positives and negatives on both. And it depends on the people. But I'll tell you what, the one thing that was the most uncomfortable for me about tenants in common is that I had to be loan ready all the time.
No, I think condo makes sense.
No, I'm just saying, that's why we converted. Because, and there were some negatives to condos too. So it's just a matter of where are you in your process? What do you want? We have always been our own property managers. As a matter of fact, it's in our philosophy paper, that if you wanna become a member of this particular condo association, you know that you will be shoulder to shoulder with everyone else. We have a project management process, it's very sophisticated. And I just encourage that I have, on behalf of our condo association, 38 years to put on the floor, in the ground, not on the table. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Any other questions?
I think that's it, so I think we can, thank you for presenting this time.
Thank you so much.
We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is gonna be item number 11. Let me run through the agenda items in order just to make sure we're all on the same page. I had item number 11, then 9, then 12, then 10, then 13, 14, 15. The rest looks the same thing after that. But since we have item number 11 next, I know that we have some public comment for that one, so we'll start with the public comment. So item number 11 is discussion and possible recommendation to revise code enforcement standards to support homeowners and tenants by Commissioner Prgm. So we'll do 2 minutes for public comment. And I'll just sort of take the cards in order that I have them.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, I have Margie Wilkinson first anyway,
Okay.
so.
I think she's
First of all, I wanna thank you for having us here tonight. I'm a member of Friends of Adeline, and we have been working with Mr. Powell on trying to save his home, and I want to appreciate Mr. Prgm's motion, or I don't know exactly what it is, but his recommendation on the issue of improving the process. I want to tell you that the process went disastrously wrong with Mr. Powell's house, and that what happened was that he became a victim of a receiver and a receivership policy that should never have happened. The receiver was appointed at the request of the city of Berkeley. He was requested by name by Zach Powell in an appeal to the court in 2017. And when the receiver was appointed, he took over ownership, literally took over ownership of Mr. Powell's house, forced Mr. Powell and his family to leave the house, and charged them for putting them up in a motel. Anyway, and then proceeded to go far beyond the original order, which was to abate the code violations. The original court order appointed the receiver and directed him to abate the code violations. And the receiver went far beyond that, remodeled the house. Several architects have told us that you could build a house for the amount of money that they spent on remodeling it. And it is no longer, it's not his house anymore. It's not the house he lived in for 45 years. It's not, it's a completely different place. But he wants to get back into it. He plans to get into it. I want to say that I have been told by the city that this is a process which is very rarely used. I have submitted a Public Records Act request to get all of the correspondence from the city attorney and within the city attorney's office concerning receiverships. So I hope within the next, let's see, how many days do I have left? 7 days, that I will have a big pile of paper that I would be happy to share with you about the problems with receivership. We don't know, we'll see what happens. If the receiver is supposed to protect the interests of the property owner, then that is exactly what didn't happen in Mr. Powell's case. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know all those details. They talk about fiduciary responsibility. But I think that it's so funny that this is happening now. Mr. Powell was in the process of working with Rebuilding Together to get his house fixed at no cost. When the city went to, he was in the,
Unfortunately, we have a time limit, but if someone would like to see their time, will allow you to do that.
Oh, no, I'm done. It just that he was in the process of working with Rebuilding Together to help him, and the city went to court and requested a receiver right at the exact same time.
For the people who are timing, just make sure it's
Nobody,
Okay.
okay.
So, okay. of course. Eugene Turretts? You'll have 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
I just want to say that I was on this commission for 8 years and was chair of it for 2 years at the end of the 1900s and the beginning of the 2000s. This is the first time I've been back. I think one of the, I'm also from Friends of Adeline, have been working on the case of Leonard Powell. What has become very clear is that current housing policies of the city of Berkeley are, to put it bluntly, racist. We see that by the fact that the African American population has diminished from 25% to 7% in about 20 years. Black homeowners and tenants have been forced out of this community. And our concern is not only stopping it, but enabling people to return. But what we see in Mr. Powell's case is perfect evidence of this. When we look at the questions of code enforcement, why were the codes enforced in the way they were on his home? I live up on near Shattuck Avenue. There's a property there for a block between Parker and Carlton Streets owned by Reza Valley. The fire that destroyed that property took place more than 40 years ago. I've not seen a receiver appointed to take over that property. I haven't seen any activity on that property to improve it in over 40 years. I know at the corner of Oregon and McGee Street is a building, I believe it's about an 8-unit rental property, with a sign on it that says, "This building is unsafe in case of an earthquake." It's a typical soft-story building. That program began in Berkeley, I believe, in 2005. That building never had a receiver assigned. Rent is still being collected from the tenants. Why not? Is the owner white? How come Mr. Powell's property was found in the way it was? Now, I believe the reason it was found was that the police were attempting to carry out activity to punish someone. They did that, and when they couldn't find the person they were looking for, who they believed lived there but didn't, they brought an inspector in. So I think this commission should be looking at the relationship of inspection services and the police department. I know this happened in the same way in the early 2000s when I was chair of the commission.
Unfortunately, that's going to be the time limit we have.
Well, I'll ask Willie, will you give me some time?
I would like to speak, but.
Okay.
And can I get your name again? Well,
Carol.
M-A-R-A-S-O-V-I-C.
At that time, the police also were looking to punish a family that lived, I believe, on Oregon Street. And at that time, I know it was the police because they accosted me as chair of the commission, trying to get me to do what they wanted. And when I told them that I couldn't talk to them about it because it was a quasi-judicial matter, an appeal of this issue, they got very disgusted. But I walked away and didn't have any conversation. They showed up at the hearing in plain clothes to testify about this house, and I had to inform the commission that these were police officers. Now, these are the only 2 cases that I personally know about. I have heard that there have been others. So I would urge you, as part of your oversight of inspection services, to find out what is the relationship between the police and inspection services, and that I think it's improper to use it in that way. I want to talk about a little bit about that there is a need for inspection services. People in South Berkeley particularly, and elderly people throughout Berkeley need to have their houses inspected. Many of us have no idea of the code violations that exist in our house. So that if there were programs, but people, I must say, are terrified to call in inspection services because of exactly what happened to Mr. Powell. They may not know Mr. Powell's case, but they believe this is how the city functions. And I think unless you develop a program whereby the services of rehabilitation are made available at the outset, people aren't going to do it. It's an impossible situation. People are not willing to jeopardize the losing of their homes. And I just want to say one more thing. I can get 2 more minutes if you want to go through this. Anyway.
I mean, for the purposes of consistency and process, I'm going to have to ask that you do request someone.
Okay, Barbara.
And what's your name?
Barb.
Could I get your name?
Barbara.
Barbara.
Barb. Reusch.
Point of privilege. People who speak or yield time are not required to give their name in the state of California.
It's all right. I'm not.
I understand. Very friendly, but keep that in mind when you ask.
So, as a matter of procedure, to track whether or not someone's spoken
It's a small
already.
room, there's not so many people.
I mean,
Anyway, I do want to bring up, because I would have tried to, if I had known the thing about Habitat for Humanity was on the recommendations beforehand, I would have spoken at that item, but I didn't know it till afterwards. Anyway, I have communicated with Habitat for Humanity about their participation in the Powell case. I felt that the communication was totally unsatisfactory in that I asked them why they worked with the city of Berkeley to in fact take away the house from Mr. Powell. They took that statement very badly. I don't blame them, but nevertheless, they claimed that at the time that they were participating in this, that they had looked at Mr. Powell's finances and everything like that, and that he could afford it. Now, either they're lying, or someone misled them. Because while at the time that they got into it, the cost was supposed to be, I believe, $300,000, which was more than the $150,000 to $200,000 that had been estimated for those repairs at the time that he looked at them. It ended up costing $700,000. Now, none of us understand how it went from the $325,000, which is, by the way, on the building permit application, it says $325,000. How did it get to be $700,000? And I think that Habitat should have to answer about that, what their role was in that. And that some of us would like to be there when they answer that question. So please let us know when they come before you. Thank you.
next I have Mick Spadden.
So I looked at the recommendation, and I have a couple recommendations for this recommendation. In the first thing, I think in the third section it says, for a hardship case, the city shall explore the use of anti-displacement funds to assist. I'd like to say, my understanding of how city functions, this is pretty much a formula for doing nothing. And so I would consider changing the wording to something like the city funding of repairs should be mandatory with a low interest rate loan, perhaps tied to the Fed rate, secured by a lien to be paid when the property is sold. This gives really a financial interest in, one, the city not going after a lot of people and doing what they did to Mr. Powell. It would temper city enforcement actions especially some overreaching enforcement code like we saw in the Powell case, and incentivize the city to minimize those costs, since the city would be covering the costs until the property was sold. So it would be a way that basically the city would have an interest in trying to help out the person rather than maximize, or their own fees or monies they're going to get with the houses is when it is sold in terms of their own input. In addition, it says punitive actions that result in the displacement of a homeowner. Presently, it's a very last resort the staff should take, and it's only conducted when all other attempts to resolve the situation have been unsuccessful. That's kind of vague, I think, and I think maybe you want to actually put in the list. So when it says all other attempts, what does that mean? Maybe something in there specific so that you know that the city has actually fulfilled that all other attempts. And I think the real thing is to when you think about things like this, is to really think about due process and how do you incentivize the city to actually look at what they're doing to the people that are involved, rather than to how it's going to affect the city operations. In fact, I think it's important to be thinking the city has its own agenda that's really not about the public. They have their own agenda, which is about the city budget. And if you can work this ordinance in such a way that the city is incentivized to do the right thing, then you're gonna actually have done your job on this commission. Thanks.
Steve, Berkeley?
Actually, I came because Igor had informed me that he was putting together something that would, in some sense, regulate receiverships from now on, because of the experience that we've been having with Mr. Powell's house and the evidence we have of the receiver having exceeded his mandate and gone beyond what he was supposed to do, leading to this excess debt that is now dumped on Mr. Powell. That is from an original $150,000 estimate to repair the code violations to now $775,000 for reconstruction of the house, not according to Berkeley's housing code, but according to state construction codes, namely Title 24. Now, we have been able to figure out what the structure of this transformation has been. It was not simply gratuitous, it was not simply unwarranted. There was a real structure to it as a cycle of debt and construction that the receiver was able to manifest. And I want to explain it to you because I think that if there's going to be something that comes out of this commission that would be aimed at regulating receivers and receiverships, it should be included. The way it worked is this. Powell never had any opposition to the violations. He was perfectly willing to fix them. But his house had been a duplex when he bought it back in the 70s. He made it into a single-family house because he had a large family. It didn't take much. He boarded up one door and put a hole in the wall. It fit his family perfectly, but 44 years later, when the city came down and inspected it, they said, okay, there's all this stuff. It's been transformed into a single-family house without permits. And they said, you have an option to transform it back to duplex condition. He refused. He did not want to take that option. He wanted to keep it a single-family house. But in order to finance what the receiver was doing
to repair violations of the city code, he had to get loans. The city offered him a loan that, he wasn't told this, would only work.
Are you wanting to see your time?
Tony Wilkinson. Thank you. Would only work if the house was in its duplex status. The receiver took this fact as cause to start to reconstruct the house to put it back into duplex condition. He rationalized it by saying, I have to do this in order for Powell to get this loan. That construction then escalated the expense on the house. Powell had to go to other lenders. They had other standards and regulations for the house, what the house had to satisfy in order for them to give the loan, and the receiver then said, okay, we have to reconstruct the house to meet those standards. This happened 3 times. And each time the receiver went to the court and said, I have to get a certificate that will allow me to borrow more money. And that's the way it got built up to $775,000. But the cycle there is between the need for a debt and the ability of the receiver to utilize that debt to go beyond what the mandate of receivership was when it was given to the receiver by the judge back in 2017. That cycle has to be prohibited. In other words, the receiver has to be carefully supervised that he does not take standard necessities like this or ancillary financial factors and use them to ostensibly, in his own language, do it for the benefit of the owner. He has to be kept in line, and that has to be. That has to be.
Would anyone else like to offer time? If not,
I'll finish now. I can finish now. I just want to say. That has to be included, I think, in anything that this commission is going to come up with as a recommendation to the city council. It's very important to understand that cycle.
So I have Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg and Commissioner Wolf. I want to say, Margie, I think I didn't actually offer you a chance to let someone see their time use. I just want to remind you that you have the ability to do that too. Just because I felt wrong for doing
I'm
that.
gonna send you all an email.
Do
I send emails to, Rhianna? To get it to you guys, I send it to you?
Yeah, I can provide you an email if you like.
Okay, you need an email,
Yeah.
you'll send it to me.
Of course, yeah.
So I have Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg in the queue first, then Commissioner Wolf. Well, I'm we're done with public comments.
Willie.
Thank you, Willie.
Good evening. I commend you. I've been in that particular hot seat. And you do a wonderful job of being able to demand respect, but also to be able to be gentle with the fact that you're dealing with diverse particular opinions. But I wanted to really kind of talk to you more so in a general sense in terms of equity, because it really respectively deals with some of the particular dialogue that's even going on here, actually. And I can say that from the perspective of South Berkeley. South Berkeley has always been dogged. South Berkeley has been the place where African Americans were delegated to live because they had covenants. South Berkeley essentially has been the place where African Americans have lived lives, had businesses, and have flourished. And I think with that said, Mr. Powell reflects that. He raised a family. He had a lot of particular stake in this community because he's been there for 40 years, paid off his house. So as commissioners, I think you should see fit to see the issue of equity and how it reflects to, as one of my fellow members here says, racism. Because it does play a part. And some of you here that on this table actually should understand that. And in some form or another should speak out on that account that there is not a fair table. He was basically put in a position where he ended up having to pay for a house that he owned. And he had paid it off, the loan. So if you are in any way going to deal with that issue, step up. Let's start seeing the issue in terms of equity. Let's start talking about issues about gentrification. Let's start talking about issues in terms of displacement. Because you are basically part of that issue, because the very fact is that's affecting us. And I believe that you have the real courage to be able to stand up, because you're young. You're the future. Thank you.
So I have Leonard Powell, but I think he spoke on it earlier, actually.
He did.
And then he's also not here. Mary Ben Steinberg.
That would be me. And I wanted to first of all thank Igor for having the courage to bring this forward as an agenda item. And please understand, I appreciate it, and I understand your reasoning for how you did it, but I feel that this measure does not have the proper teeth, and that there is plenty of evidence, as Ms. Wilkinson and Mr. Martino and Mr. Phillips all pointed out, of malfeasance on the part of some of the staff. And that is not to demonize all the staff. I've been a public employee. I understand how hard the job is and how hard y'all work. But there are some serious questions here. And there has got to be repercussions when people work against their fiduciary interests of the citizens of this city. And until there is not going to be a lot of confidence in the community about how things are run. And, you know, we've even heard at the Berkeley Neighborhood Association, Mr. Burrows testify that the city codes are often not consistent with each other. The city, the fines and the fees and the situations like this are such that for years people have been looking for ways to go around code enforcement. I used to be partnered with a carpenter, a handyman, who was constantly approached by people looking to get around the permitting and zoning and code enforcement process because of raw fear of the way the laws are applied and of the draconian actions that can be taken against the most vulnerable homeowners when it somehow suits other interests that the city or individuals within the city have. And that can't continue if we're going to have any kind of safety. And it's also not good for homeowners who don't want to be at the mercy of some individual who they can't have checked on by their government, as should be the case. So if you're really serious about making sure that there's safety for renters, for homeowners, for the neighborhood, but also fairness, then please recommend that there be consequences for people who have not acted in good faith in the city. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's all the public comment cards that I have right now. Is there anyone else wishing to speak as part of public comment for this particular item? Going once, going twice. Seeing none, we'll now move to the discussion as a commission as to what to do. I have Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg in the queue, followed by Commissioner Wolf, followed by myself.
Did you want me to?
Actually, you're correct. You're right. Commissioner Schrago has the floor because it's his item, and then we'll go to the order that I mentioned before.
Thank you. I will try to keep this succinct. I want to thank the community for coming out and everyone who made suggestions about this item. Thank you for your suggestions. I wanted to give give you a couple of updates that have happened subsequent to my submitting this item. The first is that this past Monday night, the Peace and Justice Commission unanimously took action on a companion item that I submitted there, which includes some additional recommendations, and some of those recommendations speak to the specific nature of Mr. Powell's situation, whereas what is before HAC focuses on really ensuring that policies, processes, and procedures by the city are done in a way that are equitable and readily transparent. There is one part of the Peace and Justice Commission's recommendations that I did want to maybe see if we can add here, and it's, I don't think it's a statement with which anyone would disagree. It's to establish, or so this would be probably item 4 in the recommendations, establish or clarify policy that code enforcement should aim to improve the safety and security of property for its current residents and their neighbors. And then I was hearing suggestions about making certain changes to this item, and here's what I would propose. So for the suggestion about number 1, that punitive actions should be the last resort, there was a suggestion to clarify what should happen prior to that last resort. So I'm open to inserting language such as, this is in parenthetical, e.g. notification of homeowner as to the nature of code violations and needed abatement, as well as the homeowner's due process rights, verification that repeated attempts to work with the homeowner have not yielded any abatement, or positive steps taken to abate violations within a reasonable time period. I'm open to other language, this is a starting point. And for number 3, this is adding on, in addition to what is there now, where there is a verified case of financial hardship that deters the ability of a homeowner to, that deters and or prevents the ability of a homeowner to abate code violation, the city should provide the property owner with an opportunity to receive a city-financed low-interest or zero-interest loan. I'm happy to answer any questions and very open to further suggestions.
So I have Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg in the queue.
I guess I had a couple of questions on the, I mean, I knew this is a policy that would have addressed many folks, but I guess one question was, I mean, I feel like we should be also making a recommendation to refer this to the auditor, and I feel like there should be an audit of kind of the cases of receivership and what has been done. I guess I had a question. I know, I mean, based on the article, I think it was in Berkeley, I read that Mr. Powell had representation early on, but that it wasn't, it still sounded like it was a market attorney or what's it called, but what, it was a for-profit.
He called it an ambulance chaser.
But it was more than
He took the fee and didn't finish the job.
Well, I think my point is that there should be a requirement that if the the homeowner is deemed to be low income or will qualify for free legal services, that there be some requirement that more than just like that maybe that an attorney be called, I don't know, from one of the legal services. It just seems concerning to me that because I do know that in the court system, receivers tend to have close relationships with the judges that are appointing them because they all know each other and they play golf together and all of those insidious things that work against communities that aren't part of that golfing club. And so I think it's very concerning to me that there wouldn't have been somebody appointed because if they were facing an eviction, it would have been easier for them to find. It's very difficult for low-income homeowners to access legal services. And so I think that there needs to, I don't know if there's some addition we could do, Commissioner Trigger.
Yeah.
About that there's some notification, and, in the same way that tenants get, when a landlord gives an eviction notice, they have to say, you can go to this place to get free legal services, that, homeowners in this situation. I also what I find odd is, it's one thing if it's rental housing and, essentially it's a business and there's, there are tenants inside, and that landlords are refusing to fix. I'm perplexed by that it was a property where the homeowner was living there, and that the government intervened. And I really think that this has to do with this concept of nuisance, and across the country, Black communities are, I don't know, there's a whole other layer of zoning on Black neighborhoods around using nuisance laws. And that the book Evicted is really less about eviction and more about the abuse of nuisance laws in Milwaukee against the Black community. And so I really kind of wonder if this is more about our nuisance laws, and I don't know enough about what really went down. And so I think there should be some emphasis on how Berkeley is using their nuisance laws. I know Hayward, we have a similar situation where there's an abuse of nuisance laws. Okay, that's my long comments.
Can I make a request to anyone? I'll add you in suggestions. That's fine. It's directly.
We're not going to adopt something tonight, and I would like to talk, Igor.
Okay, is that a
Commissioner Wolf is next in the queue.
Yes.
I'll add you to the queue as well.
First of all, I don't think we're in any position to adopt a unified recommendation about what should be going forward with regards to homeowners who cannot afford to make repairs, which is what the gist of what Igor's memo is about. So the recommendation is that we establish a process. If a homeowner cannot afford to pay for the repairs, that there be a loan process that would either be a loan that the owner would repay as the owner is living in the house, or it could be a lien on the property for when the owner sold the house. So I think this should be a standalone memo that is sent to, as a recommendation to the council, that going forward, there'll be a process that a homeowner in this situation can follow. I certainly support what Leah is saying about legal services and all of that. A separate recommendation to the council should be, you need to do a fact-finding on what happened. And everybody gets interviewed, it all gets documented, because frankly, I have seen many different reports right now about what happened, including the fact that Mr. Powell owns other properties in Oakland, and this can't be ignored. So we don't really know all the facts.
Doesn't own any other properties.
It's not true.
Well, someone's lying in the press.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I know, I don't know, but I think there needs to be a fact-finding process about it all, and that would allow all of the mistakes that were made to be exposed. It would also figure out whether or not, if someone has made repairs that without permits, going from the duplex to the single, if he had just paid for his permits that he should have gotten before, if that would have solved the thing. I think we need more information about what actually happened to Mr. Powell, but keep it separate going forward from this recommendation to prevent displacement because someone can't pay for code violations. That's all I wanted to say. But the third thing I'd like to say is, where's the money coming from that will fund these loans? And so it has to be some fund that we're going to be identifying, and I don't know then if that fund would have a limit as to the availability of those funds, so only 3 homeowners could be helped a year. So these are things that have to be worked out to make it this an actual realistic proposition going forward. So 2 separate things. Was there mishandling of Mr. Powell at his house, and get it all documented? And number 2, what we want to do in the future. That's all I want to say. And I don't think we're going to wordsmith it in the next 10 minutes.
Okay, so I have myself in the queue, followed by Commissioner Lord, followed by Commissioner Wright, followed by Commissioner Trigger. I appreciate the energy that Friends of Adeline has brought to this, and the fact that there's community out here to support in this circumstance, and the fact that there's people who are willing to vocalize a frustration. The frustration that I have is that it really doesn't matter in most circumstances how the law is written, because the African American community is going to have it interpreted against them. We're going to have it found against us. I said them, but I don't know why I said them. Like, I've been in situations where myself, I've been in a circumstance being accused of something, having done nothing, and found myself to have been found guilty of it at the end of it. And regardless of the evidence that was presented, regardless of what's been done, it was done in minor circumstances in like school. So to me, I tend to have a skepticism of most processes generally, and even with procedures put in place, I still question their efficacy in most of these circumstances. I don't have a solution for how to deal with it, because at the end of the day, like anything that has ambiguity in it, on the one hand, leads to abuse, and anything that is very specific and pointed oftentimes just impacts the wrong communities that it's intended to it. So I don't really have the exact solution in this circumstance. I know that one thing I'd like to do is entertain a motion to just direct the city attorney to specifically have, the city attorney works at the discretion of the city council. Their entire job is to represent the will of the city council. And I don't know all the ins and outs of the law in this particular circumstance, but I know that with the direction of council to preserve the ownership of the home, they'll have to, their ethical obligation as an attorney is going to be to find whatever they can most reasonably do as a city to take an action step. So moving forward, that's one thing I'd like to entertain a motion to amend this item for to have. I'm at a general loss for words. I also think that on this particular thing, I'd like to also make a motion to extend the meeting past 10 p.m. We don't traditionally do that, but I'd like to do that for this particular conversation and the rest of our agenda item. And that is, there's been a second, so.
What specific time?
Probably 10:30.
Was Igor the second on that?
Yes. With that, since there's been a second, I just want to move it to a vote, one way or the other. If it doesn't pass, it doesn't pass, but I'd like to just go to a vote. So, any objection?
Going past 10:30, to going to 10:30?
I would go for 10 past or quarter past.
10:15, I'll say yes on it.
Okay, 10:15. Alright. So motion for 10:15, seconded by Commissioner. Alright, all those in favor? All those opposed? So we're gonna go till 10:15 tonight.
Did you vote, Mary?
Oh, one objection, Mary.
No, I
She
mean, as long as I have 1 minute before 10:15.
Reserve it for the good of order.
Okay. Alright, so next in the queue, Commissioner Lord.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Trega, for the initiative, for responding to this. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but this is non-responsive to the problem that occurred. The testimony tonight from the people was excellent, and I'm so glad that Mr. Powell came. Here's the flaw with this document. You're trying to restrict quote-unquote punitive actions that result in displacement taken by staff. In this case, staff took no action that could have reasonably been foreseen to cause the displacement of Mr. Powell. What happened to Mr. Powell was that the receiver took a bunch of actions that resulted in his displacement and the threat of the loss of his home. And I thought it was really interesting that when Mr. Powell was talking about the sort of remedies to law, he was talking largely about that receivership process, about the need for tighter oversight of the receiver, about the need for tenants to have a proper advocate who can make sure that the owner is being well informed and given the choices that are really his to make. That the actions taken for by the receiver be well accounted and so on. There is nothing in the whole code enforcement process that says now the city will eject this owner. Okay, that's always some other entity doing that. and this doesn't address it, which means you can dress this up with as many other things as you want, and I think there's nothing that's ever gonna trigger it. So my suggestion is that we work harder on this, that especially as this court case unfolds, as we get more information, I hope, get some of the documentation that's coming in from Friends of Adeline, that we study this more deeply, and that we make it more aggressive. And you know, the thing is, it's true that this commission, by ordinance, has oversight responsibility of code enforcement activities. And we're just starting to get going on how we're really gonna do that. And so there's gonna be plenty of opportunity, and this is a great case study to think about and work through this year. I think it's better to do a good job than a rush job. Yeah.
Next in the queue, Commissioner Wright.
Oh, sure.
And then next in the queue is Commissioner Prgm.
Thank you. So at 10:15, or probably a minute before, I'm going to call for a vote. And I tend to only do that in exigent situations, and this is one. The clock is ticking, the train has left the station, this case is ongoing, and from what I understand, maybe close to a final decision point. I think it would be critical to take an affirmative stance by this commission tonight. I'm all for working more on this. Based on comments that have been made, I would suggest an additional point, which would be, it's a recommendation to the city council. We can't direct the city attorney to do anything, nor the city auditor. We can only make the recommendations to council. So a new recommendation that the city council commission a formal fact-finding process in the matter of Mr. Powell. It should also refer the matter to the city attorney. The fact-finding should, among other things, focus on steps taken by the receiver and look into any communications the city may have had with the receiver. So that hopefully begins to address Mr. Lord's point. I appreciated Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg's comments, and my only ask would be if you have any concrete amendments that you could suggest, that would make my life a lot easier right now. Thank you.
So Commissioner Wolf, then I have myself back in the queue with Commissioner Schwartz.
So,
Your turn.
all right. So Igor, I would entertain a totally different recommendation to the council, which just says you need to look into what happened, but not to propose a loan program now. We could do that in a subsequent meeting where we have this language well stated and it gets decoupled from Mr. Powell's situation. I really think Mr. Powell's situation has triggered this strong concern, and I agree, but I think first they need to, face what happened and see what they can do for him as an individual person. And then we could also be introducing, we could look at it next month, a new program that you are recommending here that would help people if they ever are in the same boat. But I think one is a very important political issue that needs to be faced now, and that's what I would do. And it could be, one paragraph that we can just craft right now that would go into a recommendation that would come from our chair.
Well, you're very good at crafting language on the fly, so I'd love to see if you're willing to put together that.
All right, the Housing Advisory Commission recommends to the Berkeley City Council that it investigates the situation that, I can't come up with a nice little sentence there, but if you could trust the chair and the vice chair to craft it, to immediately investigate the chain of events that started, 4 years ago with Mr. Powell and housing code enforcement that led to the requirement that a receivership takeover, the repair of his home that led to debt now that he's facing of over $700,000, and he's in displaced from the family home. And so that we're basically just looking to have this investigated. I'm sorry that the language is a little rough, but that's the gist of
That
it.
sounds like my recommendation number 4.
Well, then you read it back to staff who's now diligently taking notes. So just for now, only focusing on 4.
Okay, if the chair will allow me. So, the council will, this is a recommendation to commission a formal fact-finding process in the matter of Mr. Powell. It should also refer the matter to the city attorney. The fact-finding should, among other things, focus on actions taken by the receiver and any communication that the city has had with the receiver.
So I have myself next in the queue, and then Commissioner Shrenko, and Commissioner Simon-Wiseberg. My only concern with the way that wording was suggested is the way that it's agendized right now is as a matter of policy. It's not like a specific instant sort of thing. So as long as the way that the language that we use, that's like, there's only one case of receivership. The other person who spoke said it was only like 3 in the past, like 20 years or something like that. So
No, he said in the last year.
10 years.
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. So there's only been 3 in the last 10 years. So like anything that we do that's a general policy affecting receivership will definitely cover the situation as well. So I think I just want to make sure we're complying with the Brown Act or whatever we suggest. So that our suggestion should be, in all current pending cases of receivership, the city does an independent audit and investigation of them to ensure that they were done effectively, to be my recommendation.
Or after the fact.
After the fact. I'm just trying to think about the Brown Act.
Well, we can add to the, item 11, to support homeowners and tenant, code enforcement standards to support homeowners and tenants, if they fail, I don't know, I mean, so you're saying we can't make it, this wasn't exactly worded the way, we wanna say it now, we can't do it?
I'm just saying that whatever we recommend has to be
Right, sorry.
recommended for the revision for code enforcement standards to support homeowners and tenants. Like, that's the way it's agenda.
I think that we can't, if we're saying, I think it would be within the Brown Act. If we're saying that we want, as the first step of this recommendation, is that we want the council to do a fact-finding, hearing or process to find out what happened so that we can have better, so we can inform our policy recommendations.
So what page are you looking at?
27.
27. Well, we would change that.
I'm just saying it was within the Brown Act because you're saying that we're doing a policy, that our action is a first step. And that's why I think it would be within the Brown Act, even though we're giving
You
it.
just said place the following policy and not have 1, 2, and 3, but just have 4?
We could also just say, set in place policies that would provide housing stability for homeowners, then we can come back next month with those specific recommendations. That in addition, and that's when the recommendation to do a fact finding.
All right, so keep the first paragraph as is. And in particular, when legal action is being attempted by the city as a result of code enforcement, action should be taken. The first action is to, and then whatever Xavier or Leah said, and that would be like 2 sentences. And then wouldn't include all these other policies, but just say, this is the first step in the action to provide housing stability, to do this investigation.
The HAC recognizes that other steps may be necessary.
Yes.
And may provide additional recommendations to council.
I'll wait till we get back around to doing that action, right? But Commissioner Shrenko is next in the queue. And then Commissioner, I didn't see who did what.
I'm in the queue.
All right,
We got 9 minutes. So I kind of agree with Mr. Ward that in some respects, this doesn't really get at the the initial bump, which was staff, you said they didn't do any, well, I would argue that maybe part of the problem is that there's not objective and clear and consistent standards for code enforcement, and if there's not, then they're always going to be used arbitrarily, and if there's racism, then yes, racism. So, I don't know what the city can do about receivership, but the city can have clear objective standards about how to enforce code. And so, I think it's important to try to work that in. I
So
know
how
that's-
that is the first paragraph?
Okay, I'm
Just
not.
apply clear and objective.
Yes, I don't know
standards.
what those clear and objective standards are, but they should exist.
I think clear, objective, and equitable standards.
Sure, absolutely.
And then under background, we can put in, and Mr. Powell's situation should be investigated. That's
Sure.
the background
That-
section.
Fine, I just feel like this, if the city, if there's no like guidelines for how code is enforced, then that leeway can and will be and might have been abused.
Well, how about due process?
Yeah, so I have next in the for the purposes of this meeting, I've been a little bit more loose so we can have more of a dialogue, but I think at this point I just kind of have to be a little bit more structured with it. So when someone's speaking, let's give them the floor, and if they want to ask you a question, they can do so. If not, you'll be back in the queue.
I'm done.
Just, it wasn't to you, it
No, I
was
got
just
you, yeah.
general. So Commissioner Lord, you're next in the, actually no, Simon-Wiseberg, then Commissioner Lord.
I just want us to kind of refocus and have this be a motion that we were recommending to the city council that they immediately begin a fact-finding process to determine, what role, what was done improperly that led to this result. And then we leave it as simple as that, because I don't, I think that this was about the receivership and that process, and that we allowed, that we started we took actions that got into court and allowed for a receivership. And I'm guessing that the present city attorney would not have done what our prior city attorney did. So I just think that we need the city to look at itself and see, how did this arise, and was it because of the particular city attorney at the time, or was it, because that's one of my concerns. And then if there's policy, because again, I think this is more about our nuisance statute and the role of the police plate, and less about our code enforcement. And my concern is also inflating code enforcement when there is a tenant-landlord relationship and when somebody is, a homeowner. To me, those are very different processes, and that's, to me, what's shocking about this. I've seen landlords do horrible things and not take care of their properties, and nobody says anything when huge action should have been taken.
So I have Commissioner Lord and then Commissioner Frank.
So Commissioner Schrenko has me thinking that indeed, objective standards and processes, or more objective than we have for code enforcement, are needed. What's in point 1 here seems to me to be roughly the first thing that came out of your head. It sounds good, it really says, okay, in this case of life safety, clearly we can't ignore that. But it seems to me situations can be more complex, and that needs more thought out. On the question of fact-finding, as I understand it, typically, if a body like this asks for fact-finding, they specify the specific questions to be answered, not what happened, or not what was done improperly, because in this case, it could be that, what does improperly mean here? Like, if every step here was legal, was lawful, if everything was done, then nothing improper was done, but the outcome was wrong. We can't just say, hey, city, go find some facts. We need to think of what the actual questions are, and we need to, we are gonna be overwhelmed with hard, tangible evidence of what happened in this case. The community has put that together, is putting that together, okay? That's gonna be available. This is just not right. This is not right for action. And listen to us, we're rushing on this. We're 2 minutes left, so I'm done. Not tonight, please.
Commissioner Prgm?
I will attempt to put something together that I think can achieve not consensus, but at least 5 votes. The HAC recommends to the Berkeley City Council that it set in place policies that would provide housing stability for homeowners and tenants. And then when legal action is, I'm sorry, so then strike the next sentence. Insert clear, objective, and equitable standards must be instituted when conducting code enforcement, which ensure that due process rights of affected homeowners and or tenants are preserved. And then the HAC asked the City Council to undertake a formal fact-finding in the matter of Mr. Powell. It should also refer the matter to the city attorney. The fact-finding should, among other things, focus on actions taken by the receiver and any communications the city has had with the receiver. The HAC recognizes that these immediate and necessary steps are the beginning of an important discussion and may elect to provide further recommendations at a later date.
Okay, is there a second for that motion?
I second.
It's been seconded. Is there any discussion? Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, let's move it to a roll call vote.
Commissioner Abdushayan,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Lord,
Abstain.
Sharenko,
Yes.
Simon-Wiseberg,
Yes.
Tregu,
Yes.
Wolf,
Yes.
Wright.
Yes.
And Igor, can I get that language from you?
Yes.
after that? Thank you.
Okay, my 1 minute. You want to speak? Commissioners, you have a handout, it was passed out to you, it's basically a poll. Your secretary, Mike, will email this to you as well. The idea is to say whether or not you support or do not support listed strategies by indicating a 1 or a 2. There's a preamble at the beginning that explains why this is being passed out. So now I publicly announce this. So is it satisfy the Brown Act? We can go ahead. Thank you. We have a
Everybody's already adjourned, it's 8:10.
Are we adjourned?
Do you have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, can you do a motion to
Motion to adjourn. Motion, second. So moved by Commissioner Wolf.
Oh, okay.
And seconded by Commissioner Franco. Yes. All those in favor of adjourning? Aye. All those opposed? No one. We are adjourned.
Thank you.